Welcome to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast, brought to you by the Draft Professor. The Draft Professor is a group of podcasters bringing you daily draft podcasts and is home to the only dynamic mock draft simulator which allows fans to mock draft against other fans. The Draft Professor Simulator features a first-round challenge, 5 unique one-round drafts. The Draft Professor Simulator features a second-round challenge, 10 unique 2-round drafts. All mock drafts are always picking against the fans and draft analysts which use the simulator. Every mock, every pick, every time. The Draft Professor also features ranked players functionality, where you can rank your favorite players at every position. Optionally, you can add tiers to your rankings to show what round you have the players graded in. The Draft Professor also features Draft a Team functionality, which allows users to snake draft a team of 22 players to demonstrate your my guys, compare player strengths, and discuss draft prospects in a way no other mock draft simulator can. Thank you for tuning in to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast. This episode will begin shortly. Well, greetings, everybody. We are starting a 32 GM mock draft, and Jake, it's good to see you.
What's going on, Jim? How are you doing this evening?
I am doing pretty good. I'm actually excited and nervous all at the same time because this isn't exactly something that we've done before. So I'm feeling pretty good, though.
We're going to roll with the punches. We're going to get these picks knocked out. Well, we might have some bugs in there, but we're going to work through it, and we're going to get through it strong. So I have faith in you.
Yeah, so I see a lot of you have checked into the chat already, so I'm just going to give a shout out. So we have the Falcons in the house, and then another Falcons GM. Okay, so
got Chargers, Raiders, Jags, Bills in the comments. We got Anthony. Shout out to everybody in the comments. And we got pouring in here is what it looks like.
So, hey, I definitely want to give a shout out to 2 people, Bill Sparks and Anthony Russo. If you are not following them, they are the behind the scenes that's going to make this event go. So you're going to see 3 of us on the podcast, myself, Jake, and then Owen's going to be coming, but he messaged me. He's on his way home from work, so he is running a little bit late tonight. And then we're going to have a couple of people rotating onto the podcast because, sitting down and doing this for 3 hours is not what everybody has in mind for a Friday night. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get this started. So, Jake, you are picking for Tennessee. Is this even a decision?
I am 101. It is to an extent. Obviously, we hire a GM earlier this week. We got Borgo in the building, Mike Borgonzi out of Kansas City, kind of building that culture. And we're going to perform from there with Brian Callahan, obviously coming from Cincinnati with Joe Burrow, working with Matthew Stafford back in the day, Peyton Manning when he was over at Denver. I mean, this is a guy that needs a quarterback in his system to progress. You could go that route. You could go an Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter. It came out earlier this week. They want a generational prospect was the word they used there. And I think there's only one in that draft, and I think it's Travis Hunter. But I think what they're talking about is they want a guy that they can believe in. And I think that guy that fits this scheme is Shedeur Sanders. You'll get a lot of Cam Ward talk, and I'm fine with either of those guys at that pick. But Shedeur, I think, matches the scheme that they want to do over here in Tennessee. And you pair him up with Brian Callahan, allow him to take those shots. And when he is kept clean, I think he's by far the best quarterback in this draft. So I'm going Shedeur Sanders with the 101.
Okay. So a couple things to everybody watching. So the player boards are going to change. So it's not the same board that loads for every team. So if you're wondering like who's available, or something like that, feel free to dump it into the chat. We have the Browns up at pick 2, and I haven't seen the Browns GM pick or GM show up in the chat yet. So if Lee doesn't show up in a minute or two, Bill Sparks will be on the clock for Cleveland.
Will Howard is off the board, folks. National championship, Cleveland. They just need a winner, is all that's Brian is saying there. But yeah, we'll see.
So when can we boo Roger Goodell? I will definitely say that when he got booed at the draft, I think when the lockout happened, that was actually like good entertainment. Bill, I don't need you to cover for Owen. This will be Jake and I until Owen gets home from work. But Bill, if you have a pick for Cleveland, the Cleveland GM has not checked in yet.
And why Bill's doing that, we can talk about Cleveland a little bit here. Obviously, they are kind of in that same boat as Tennessee, as they do not have a quarterback. They are paying a guy a lot of money. And Bill putting in the comments here, Abdul Carter out of Penn State. Clearly one of the 2 best players in this draft, just from a pure talent perspective. Obviously played inside linebacker over at Penn State 2 years ago, switches over to edge and set the world on fire this past season. Obviously, all of the traits are going to be there, and it sounds like the intangible traits are there as well. So you love to hear that. Best player available, just like he says, generational talent. This is the same mold of a Micah Parsons, and I hate helmet scouting, but that's what it looks like on tape. You see the inside linebacker, you see the outside linebacker, the pass rushing ability at that position, and if they pair that up with a Myles Garrett on the other side, that is the scariest combo I can think of to date that I remember since covering the draft. You put those 2 guys on each side, and you are just going to burn offensive tackles at the line of scrimmage, and that's going to be a force. You might not need a quarterback at that point.
Yep. So the Giants are up, and I see that they call me Mr. U is in the chat. So please don't wait for us to tell you you're on the clock. If you know you're on the clock, you can put your pick in and just keep the draft moving, because when one person's on the clock, there's always 31 people waiting. So
we got New York here with the Giants. Obviously, need a quarterback as well. You always have the option to look at a Cam Ward. I know the Shedeur Sanders talk has been kind of getting hyped up over there in New York. Obviously, he wore the cleats a couple of weeks ago. And then I think he was just in the Big Apple recently as well, throwing passes to Malik Neighbors out there. So with Cam Ward, I can see that being a good fit for that scheme as well. I think you could pair him up with Malik Neighbors, and that's a match made in heaven as well. Obviously, they've got some of that turmoil in the front office, but then you look at who else could be on the board for him. I mean, they also could use tackle help. They could use DB help. Is this a spot for Travis Hunter out here? Could they put him out at corner and allow him to be if not the best player in the draft, the second best player? So it's a need versus talent aspect for New York.
Okay. So a couple things for everybody listening. We definitely appreciate you here. When you are on the clock, text the pick in, because at this point we're gonna time the Giants out just to keep the draft moving. So I am gonna say that the Giants pick Cam Ward, quarterback out of Miami. And Draft Utopia, you are on the clock for New England.
That would be quite the pick for you, Jim, if the Bills somehow ended up with Abdul Carter. And I would take my hats off to that. But we got New England over here. I mean, just hired Mike Vrabel, very familiar with him. Is this a spot? Did we just pick Travis Hunter? I mean, that just makes sense. You got Vrabel out there. You need a corner. It just matches need and talent. And then we've got the Jags here. I know Jags are in the chat.
Okay, so Greg, I appreciate you letting me know that you were not the one that I had assigned the Falcons to. And Dirty Bird Central, thank you for the reminder. That's cool that we have other people. So Mike is saying Will Johnson, corner, goes to the Jags. So, Jake, you can keep talking about the picks. My role is going to be admin. The less I talk, I think the smoother this goes.
We can definitely make that happen. And then we got who we got here? Oakland coming up on the clock. Interesting pick. Obviously, quarterback is a need. You're not reaching at this point in time. Could this be a spot for the first wide receiver to go off the board? Obviously, we got Tedero McMillan over here. You could go Luther Burden. Are you falling in love with one of those guys? This is just a team that has a lot of holes. You could, and I think with the Will Johnson snipe by the Jags, that could be a big spot where they could have taken him. And it's unfortunate that Travis Hunter and Will Johnson come off the board there because that could be a huge need. Do you kind of go think about a Mason Graham here? He might not be fitting the best need for the team, but I think as far as talent goes, this is the best fit. Maybe this is an Ashton Jeanty spot as well, potentially. Running back is definitely a need for him, but are you willing to take him with the 6th pick overall? And who do we have coming off the board? I totally missed Tedero McMillan. So they get the size there on the outside. You're hoping you can develop him there. I know with that height, you sometimes have to worry about a wide receiver and that stop and start versatility at that size. I think Tedero is going to be a great wide receiver, especially at the next level. And I think he fits the mold of just an Oakland Raider. You see that huge body on the perimeter with that silver and black. You love to see it. And then 100% willing to take Ashton Jeanty here.
Yeah.
Love to see it.
That's Owen. He'll be joining the podcast in a minute. That way Jake's not talking into the air. He'll have somebody to talk to while I'm making sure all the picks come in. So
that's going to be great. But yeah, we got Jets on the clock here. We got Ashton Jeanty on the board for them. Obviously, they got Breece Hall, so this isn't a Jeanty spot. They could potentially use a Mason Graham here. I think this would be a good landing spot for him. DB help definitely for sure as well. Maybe a Malachi Starks potentially. Could they use some safety additions there? I think they could benefit from some interior offensive line help as well. You get Olu Fashanu last year, who once he came in was very, very serviceable as a left tackle. But I think you could kick somebody, one of these other tackles to guard conversions, which there are so many. And there it is, Mason Graham out of Michigan, defensive tackle. You love to see it. And as of now, I think that's probably the best value out of any of the 7 teams that have picked so far. And then we got Carolina on the clock. Another team that could definitely benefit on the defensive side of the ball. If Mason Graham gets by New York, he is definitely landing in Carolina, in my opinion. That is the floor for a Mason Graham. And then we've got Jalen Walker, edge out of Georgia. Lock it in for Carolina.
Wow, there he is.
I'm assuming.
Yep.
But yeah, so we got Jalen Walker there. Very interesting prospect. I know he's getting knocked down boards by like PFF and stuff because he's almost this tweener. And I just don't see that. Jalen Walker is one of the 10 best prospects in this year's draft, in my opinion. So we got New Orleans on the clock here, who could definitely, I mean, this is a guy that I'm going to probably put a wide receiver on that team. Maybe a Luther Burden. I think this is a good landing spot for him potentially. They could benefit from rushing the passer a little bit more effectively as well. So maybe this is Maybe they reach on a Kenneth Grant potentially. I think that could be a good fit potentially. They could. I think if you're just going simplified here, and we got Smooth Hoops in the chat, who is our Saints GM. We'll see which direction he goes here, but again, they could definitely improve in a couple different spots.
I'm definitely curious to see where the room has the tackles. Right. So that's one of the cool things about doing a 32 GM mock is that you're going to be able to see other people's boards. Right.
Yes,
because
yes.
I'm a huge believer in don't believe the board that you see on your favorite mock draft simulator. Go with the boards of the people and look at that.
And that's why we do this.
That's definitely why we do this. So the pick is in. That was Malachi Starks.
Malachi Starks.
Focusing on the board. Stick to your board.
Got Chicago here. Will they continue to build around Caleb Williams? Obviously, they could use some help, certainly on this offensive line. And you talk about the tackles, and this is such an interesting draft because there's so many tackles, especially at the upper echelon, they're going to get kicked inside, and they're going to be guards. And you can look at a Will Campbell, you can look at a Kelvin Banks. I mean, Josh Simmons, even. There's so many that you could kick inside of the next level. So I haven't seen the Bears GM in the chat just yet, but if I'm him personally, I'm trying to get some talent there on the interior and protect Caleb Williams to allow this generational prospect to develop. Because the wide receivers, they're going to do great over there. I know defense is a big problem as well, and 100% agree. You got to go Will Campbell. And then we're moving on to San Fran, which I know I saw San Fran's GM in the chat just a little while ago. Another interesting one that could benefit from the offensive line help, especially at tackle, especially at guard. And maybe they potentially go interior defensive line with a Kenneth Grant of sorts, or with George Kittle. I know it's probably not been talked about as much. Maybe this is a Tyler Warren spot with him aging out. Maybe you find that replacement. It usually takes about 2 to 3 years. We got a Kelvin Banks out of UT, out of Texas. The true UT, I will add. And they sprint to the podium.
Okay.
And now we got Dallas. Which
I think Dallas is going to be Bill Sparks. It's either Anthony or Bill that's got Dallas.
And I would love to see, are we going with the chalk? I know this is a big landing spot for a lot of Ash and Genty truthers out there. And it makes sense personally. Sorry, somebody's texting me. And it makes sense. Obviously, Jerry Jones is going to Jerry Jones. And like Ryan puts in the comments, maybe this is Luther Burden's spot. Do you pair him up with a CeeDee Lamb, who, in my opinions, are maybe one of my comps for Luther Burden is CeeDee? And there it is. Dallas selects Luther Burden the third at a Mizzou. And then we move on to the Miami Dolphins. So I did see, was it Miami's OC or DC just did some interviewing for potential head coach. I saw that just as of my drive home.
That's Anthony Weaver, right?
I believe so. I was scrolling Twitter on my way home, just leaving the gym. So this is another spot that could benefit probably on the interior offensive line. They could go. I mean, this would be like a dream made match in heaven for like a Malachi Starks if he was to fall here. And we got.
So, Jake, do you want to take a minute and review the first 11 picks? Because we may have some people that just joined. So kind of go down in order, and we're going to buy a minute for the Miami GM to come online.
For sure. So we got Nashville, Tennessee Titans selecting Shedeur Sanders with the 101. They're wrist rocking over there in Nashville, and they're happy with that pick. And at that point in time, it's either one of these quarterbacks you're trading back. Then we got the Cleveland Browns getting the best pass rush duo in the current NFL with Abdul Carter and Myles Garrett. Then hopping into New York, they get the replacement for Daniel Jones. They get Cam Ward, who obviously struggles with some mental processing at times and might be a little bit too calm in the pocket, which is a huge – you don't hear that. So Cam Ward's ceiling, I believe, is definitely above Shador's, but his floor might be a little bit lower too. I think they're happy regardless. You can flip-flop both those picks. New England getting the best player in the entire draft in Travis Hunter. Is he going to play wide receiver? Is he going to play corner? Yet to be determined. But if I know Mike Vrabel, he's going to have him blocking on the perimeter and playing corner. And there is the pick for Miami. We got Josh Simmons coming out. Go and scroll up just a little bit more for me. And then we got Tedero McMillan and Will Johnson going back-to-back with the Jags and Oakland. Mason Graham, the pick of the draft thus far, in my opinion, out of Michigan, going to the other New York team. Then we got Jalen Walker going over there to Carolina. Malachi Starks going to New Orleans. And then we are just rocking and rolling now is what it looks like. Closing in on this latter half of the first round with Will Campbell coming off the boards, Kelvin's Banks, Luther Burden, and now Josh Simmons to Miami, who still very early in this processing for this offensive tackle group for me in my evaluation, but I really like Josh Simmons. And we got Colts drafting Tyler Warren out of Penn State. This was a team that was talked about so much last year as the Brock Bowers pick. And it didn't come to fruition, and it bit them in the ass because Brock Bowers goes out to have the best rookie tight end year ever. So they traded that out for Latu, of course, who was a fine pass rusher. Obviously, it wasn't Jared Verse or Chop Robinson, but he's also better than Dallas Turner as well. So Mike Green, I love it. The Atlanta Falcons grab Mike Green, the edge rusher out of Marshall. Best ghost move in the entire draft, just vanishes in front of tackles. One of the best highlight tapes, we'll say, out of any of these edge rushers, in my opinion. Probably even better than Abdul Carter. But this is a guy that's been flying up draft boards as we've progressed through this draft season, we'll say. And it's not stopping. It's only getting higher. And this is the highest I think I've seen him personally go thus far, but I don't hate it. And now we're at the middle point. We're at pick 16. We got the Arizona Cardinals on the board.
Hey, so before we do the Cardinals, let's give a shout out to Peter Quinn. If you're all the way over across the ocean and you are watching this podcast, thank you. I am glad that we are providing you some Friday night post-midnight entertainment. And Peter, let us know. You said you're a Seahawks fan, so welcome. And if you want to draft for Seattle, I don't think Seattle has a GM in this. So Bill Sparks, please confirm if we have a Seattle GM or if Peter could take that over.
Put your hard hat on. You're on deck. We got 2 picks until you go. But yeah, we got Arizona here. Doesn't look like we have a pick just in, but another team that could definitely benefit on some offensive line help for sure to protect Kyler Murray. Obviously, with his smaller stature, you definitely got to throw some extra bodies back there. Let that dude do what he does. And I love Kyler Murray's game. I know he's talked about as a very mediocre quarterback at this point in time, maybe a potential bust as a former 101. But I think he'll put it together. And we've got the pick in the comments. We've got Alfred Collins, DT, out of Texas to shore up their interior defensive line. Love to see it. Definitely a huge need for them as well. And now we got Cincinnati on the clock, which this is another one. Is T. Higgins going to remain in Ohio? That's going to be the talk of the town this upcoming season. And if he doesn't, do they have to go wide receiver? But looks like we got the pick rolling in, who I would have probably taken slightly before an Alfred Collins, and that's Kenneth Grant out of and kind of get out of Michigan. Going to be a great prospect. He played great last season as well. So this is a guy that's going to continue to step up. Bills get sniped, and I don't think he would have made it there, but I think there's going to be a lot of good prospects still left on the board.
Okay, so
and Jamie McLeod in the comments, Genty falling to Houston, maybe? He's falling down the boards, and this is the thing. If he gets by Dallas, who's going to be willing to take that shot? Because, I mean, Miami, they got Devon Achane. He's not going to take it. The Colts have got Jonathan Taylor. Obviously, the Falcons, Bijan Robinson. Maybe the Cardinals potentially. But, I mean, he's going to get pushed down boards if he doesn't. And whoever's going to take Ashton Genty is going to be tickled pink. They are going to be running to the podium when they make that pick, and they're going to be ecstatic. But at the end of the day, it's a running back. So do you overvalue him? So waiting on Peter to throw in this pick.
Yeah, so it's unclear to me if we had a Seattle GM assigned. That's one of the I definitely need to give a shout out. Bill and Anthony behind the scenes are like super busy tweeting out every single pick of this draft. So make sure you give Bill Sparks and Anthony Russo a follow, everybody.
Hey, shout out to all 32 GMs in this mock draft, because this is a journey. It's the first time we've done this, and we're buzzing through it already. We're already halfway through this first round. So we got Tyler Booker out of Alabama getting kicked inside, interior offensive line. You love to see it. Guy that definitely benefited from going back to school this past season. And even in games like Oklahoma, where Alabama was just stifled, Tyler Booker still had a great game. It was unfortunate that Jalen Milroe and crew couldn't put something together in that, but he was not the problem. Tyler Booker is a very talented guard at the next level. And then we got Tampa Bay coming up here on the clock. So another team that maybe you look at edge here. We got Bill hopping in on the chat, or hopping in on the stream, but correct me if I'm wrong, Bill, but Tampa Bay, they could definitely benefit from maybe an edge here. Maybe this is where we see another DB come in.
I would go DB here. I think Tampa Bay is definitely going to want to go DB. I know Anthony's going to be picking for Tampa Bay since he's got some familiarity with Todd Bowles, but I wouldn't be shocked to see a Siobhan Revel type pick here. I think that'd probably be a really good fit for Todd Bowles, give him, some defensive back help down the line.
I would definitely like to see that. And maybe if they go edge, like Ryan puts in the comment, maybe a Nick Scourton out of Texas A&M, definitely. And we actually go the different edge. We go Shamar Stewart over Nick Scourton. And it is in the books. That's I think the first time I've seen that in this draft cycle.
Yeah, I know he's a little bit controversial.
Jake, that Stewart went before Scourton?
Yes, correct. I think it was the first time I've seen that.
So just everybody picking, or everybody in the chat, tell us who you have as your edge 2. Is it Scourton, Stewart? And technically Stewart here is edge 3 because Green is already off the board.
Yeah, I know it's a little bit controversial to have him before Scourton because a lot of people have, Scourton in the top 10, and I've seen Shamar Stewart all over the place. I've seen him in the middle of round 1. I've seen him towards the end of round 1. There's some folks who think he's a round 2 prospect, me being one of those folks, but it's a definite need for Tampa Bay to go edge here. I think any sort of defensive talent is going to be the move if you're Tampa Bay.
And we got the Brugler who mentioned Stewart above Scourton, and we got the Beast coming out here soon. So, I definitely could see it. Scourton's still for me. Yeah, and I would agree there. And Jamie in the comments, James Pierce, edge 2. I think I still land there. James Pierce, I think, had a great year. He's still got to work on a lot of things, but that athleticism, that twitch, you love to see it. Him and Mike Green, those are going to be the two that are fighting for my heart at this point in time. I think I still might have Pierce slightly above him, though. Who do we have on the clock now? We have
I believe it's
Denver is on the clock, correct?
Yeah, I
So
believe Denver is on the clock here.
And I thought somebody stepped up to do Denver, but I don't see him in the chat. I don't think I've seen anybody say Denver is in the house. So
Yep, there it is, right there. Carl with the Denver Broncos.
There's the pick.
There it is. I was going to say this is probably Genty's floor if we're talking Ashton Genty here. He is a Sean Payton guy, and they're going to move off of Javonte Williams, and they're going to need a star in that backfield.
So unfortunate for Javonte. I loved him coming out, and it's unfortunate he just couldn't put it together. The injuries catch up to him, but Ashton Genty getting plugged in that system. I mean, he's gonna be Ashton Genty at the next level. That's for sure.
Yes.
And now we got the Pittsburgh Steelers on the clock. Another one.
So
it could go a multitude of ways.
Yeah, Bill, is this me? Which one?
No, this one is me. I've got the Cardinals, the Colts, and the Steelers. This will be the last me of round one. And I'd been kicking this one around all day, trying to think of different wide receivers to kind of fit, because I think Pittsburgh's going to go a wide receiver here. I think that with everything that's going on with Pickens, the trade rumors, things like that, in this scenario, there is one guy I would love because I have a first round grade on him, but he doesn't necessarily fit the mold of a wide receiver that they would look for. It would be Alec Iomanor typically, but I'm going to go with the ultimate Robin to someone's Batman. Emeka Egbuka, the wide receiver from Ohio State, is going to make his way to Pittsburgh.
Okay, and Chargers, are you in the house? So that was somebody off of Discord. I remember.
Yep, and Anthony's right. It's a need, but do they go wide receiver because of their history? The biggest needs that you would look would be wide receiver, corner, and quarterback potentially, but I don't feel comfortable putting Milroe right here. Yep. And the Chargers now on the clock go James Pierce Jr. from Tennessee. Probably the best pure pass rusher.
Yep.
Yeah, I would say probably the best pure pass rusher with Khalil Mack on his way out the door, sunsetting his deal in Los Angeles. I think it's probably an excellent pick. Jake, are you surprised that Pierce fell this far?
No, just because I know I saw video clips earlier today of him helping in run support, but I feel like that's still not the main case for him. He still gets bullied. He still needs to add size to that frame, which I think he will. I think he's just got some developmental stuff he's going to add upon. I could compare him very similar to maybe like a Chop Robinson coming out last season, who had a good year this season. Led all rookies in pressure percentage, if I remember correctly. But in the run game, he's still got to do some work there. So I think James Pierce fits that mold. But as far as just a pure pass rusher, I think he's second to only Abdul Carter right now in this draft class. So I think it's not gonna even surprise me if he falls out of the first round. It would a little bit. But I mean, this is a good landing spot for him. I think this is where these mid to late 20s.
Okay, so we're gonna do a quick pause to see if the Green Bay GM checks in. Let's do a quick review of. I don't know. Did your last review get to 11, Jake?
I think we ended up at 13. I think Josh Simmons had just gotten picked, and we had Tyler Warren from Mr. Bill Sparks here that drafted right after that. So we got Indianapolis grabbing Tyler Warren. Like we talked about, this is a big need for this team. We talked about them grabbing Brock Bowers all last season. As we progress through these mock drafts, they didn't go that route, but they get the best tight end in this class, in my opinion. And then we got Mike Green, who's flying up boards as we talked over in Atlanta. Then we got the Cardinals grabbing Alfred Collins. Do you want to talk about Alfred Collins a little bit more, Bill? I think this was your pick as well.
Yeah, it was my pick, and I know it's probably a little bit of a shocking pick, but here's the thing. The Cardinals are going to need somebody in the middle of that defense to just eat up blocks, and pound for pound, Alfred Collins is the best run defender, defensive tackle in this entire draft class, and I mean entire. I'm talking better than Mason Graham. I'm talking better than Grant, better than anyone. Does it leave a little bit to be desired in terms of pass rush ability? Yes, but he's large, he's athletic, he can defend the run, and that's exactly what the Cardinals are looking for. Offensive line is a definite question mark as well, especially along the interior in front of Kyler Murray, but I think you can come back in round 2 and get a very solid guard. So they go with a defensive tackle prospect who's probably by the end of this week at the Senior Bowl going to be even higher than that potentially.
Definitely. And I think you look at that program and just what they've put out, even these last few years out of Texas on the defensive line. T'Vondre Sweat, very similar mold to what you're kind of talking about. That's what I'm hearing. A guy that maybe could still progress as a pass rusher, but when you're talking about run defense, second to none. And then Byron Murphy was right next to him. And even before that, you had Keandre Colburn, who was drafted in the 5th round, I believe, 6th round.
Yep.
So they're going to be continuous next man up mentality over there in Texas. And Alfred Morris, the next one that's really coming out of there.
So Jamie, Packers have thresholds for like every position they draft. They're looking for certain measurements. And one of the draft professors, his name is Brian Maffey. And Brian has a database with like all the player measurements. And he can tell us like, here's the players that'll be on the Packers boards based upon those measurements. So that's why I mocked Revel to Green Bay and he laughed at me. So my 2 choices here for Green Bay would be Michael Williams or Derek Harmon. And that's because I know that both Brian and Newt like those picks when I posted mock drafts to Twitter. Bill, if you had to choose between Michael Williams or Derek Harmon to Green Bay, who would you pick?
I would probably go Derek Harmon. I think they need somebody along the interior that can help, kind of get a little bit younger along the interior. Michael Williams is great, but I just don't think he fits defensively what they're looking for. He's more of a 4-3 defender, where Green Bay runs kind of a more 3-4 kind of hybrid scheme. So I would say it's probably Harmon. Is it probably a little high for him? Absolutely. But we're in this point in the draft where after about 16 or 17, it's going to start being 2nd round graded guys because there's just not that many 1st round graded talents. And Jake, you might have a different spin on that one.
No, it's an unfortunate year. I know every season you usually don't have 32 1st round grades. Unfortunately for this one, it's like 16, 17 for me. And the blue chips, I mean, we've gone from 7 to 8 in the last couple of years, got 4 this season. So the talent wise is not at the upper end of this year's draft. It's getting deeper in. I think there's depth at many positions that are lacking in years past. So this is a year that I want lots of picks in these middle rounds because that's where you're going to make your hay, getting those depth players to develop. So I do agree with you in that same right, though. Where are we at? We've got Minnesota on the clock.
Yeah. So Owen, I want to let you know, I work from home, so my commute is not anywhere near as difficult as yours. But welcome. I am glad that you made it onto the podcast safely, so it's good to see you.
Yeah, roads are not the best up in Buffalo, New York right now. So,
okay, so we will do a quick recap so that Owen can see who has been picked. And while we're doing that, am I the one that has the Vikings?
I believe you do. I believe we didn't dole out the Vikings. So,
okay. So pick 1, Shedeur Sanders to the Titans. 2 is Abdul Carter to the Browns. 3 was Cam Ward to Miami. 4 was Travis Hunter to the Patriots. Will Johnson to the Jaguars. Teteroa McMillan to the Raiders. Mason Graham to the Jets. Jalen Walker to the Panthers. Malachi Starks to the Saints. Will Campbell to the Bears. Kelvin Banks to the 49ers. Burden to Dallas. Josh Simmons to Miami. Tyler Warren to the Colts. Mike Green to the Falcons. Alfred Collins to the Cardinals. Kenneth Grant to the Bengals. Tyler Booker to the Seahawks. Shamar Stewart to the Buccaneers. Ashton Genty to the Broncos. Emeka Egbuka to Pittsburgh. James Pierce to the Chargers. Derek Harmon to the Packers. And I am on the clock for the next two teams.
Ooh.
So
If I'm throwing a hat in the ring, I would think that it's something either along the interior of the offensive line for Minnesota or defensively, probably corners, probably. And it's crazy to say Minnesota needs corners because they've drafted them so often, but they just haven't worked out. And I think if they get here and you have guys like Revel, Morrison, and Jade Barron and Maxwell Hairston potentially on the board, it's like a kid in a candy store. Owen, what are you thinking on Minnesota's pick here?
I definitely think corner is a place they could go with that. I'm pretty sure they had Stephon Gilmore starting them for the back half or into the playoff run with them. So he's never really someone who can come in and be a long-term answer. He's kind of this journeyman going out and getting a one-year contract. So you're going to want to find someone who's more stable and consistent there. And especially if you can you're going to swing on first-round picks at corner so many times, you're going to eventually land on one of them.
Yeah. So I'm thinking if Revel is falling to 24, he is a first-round grade. He's just injured. Yeah, so I'm going to go Revel at 24. And then for Houston, okay, there's three players here that I would not have predicted for Houston. I would not have predicted necessarily that Michael Williams falls this far. And you can see people have picked Williams to the Texans because that's how he gets so high on their board. I like tight end. And again, Loveland is a true first-round grade falling to pick 25. And same thing with Walter Nolan. And based upon scarcity of the position, I'm going with Walter Nolan to the Texans. I think it's just going to be harder to find an impact defensive lineman later in the draft, whereas you're going to be able to find tight end and edge players in round 2. So I'm going Walter
I'm surprised Nolan made it this far.
Say that again?
I'm surprised Nolan made it this far, especially with some of the D tackles going before him. I'm definitely a lot higher on him than some of the guys that were already drafted ahead of him. So that's definitely a steal of a pick there, especially if you compare him up with those two edge rushers they already have in Houston. It's going to be a deadly pass rush if he gets there.
Yeah, Bill, thank you for coming on the podcast and stepping in.
Yes,
and
thank
Steve,
you, Bill.
Welcome to the draft.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Fantastic. So the Rams GM is Brock Vieira in the chat.
So we got the Rams on the clock here, and very few often do we see a first round pick over there in LA. And I mean, they could use a multitude of positions as well. Is this you mentioned him, Colson Loveland? They could definitely use a tight end. I think this could be a good landing spot for that type of player. Do they go interior offensive line as well? That's something we've brought up multitudes of already on here on this draft. So a couple different positions they can look at here as we wait for this pick to come in.
Yeah, and this is a team that kind of addressed a lot of needs in last year's draft class. They had a bunch of impact rookies, whether it was Cam Kitchens at safety, they had Braden Fisk and Jared Verse on the edge and the D-line there. Someone like a Loveland at tight end, especially if they're going to be losing Cooper Kupp and they're going to need to add another weapon into the offensive passing game to complement Puka Nacua, that could definitely be something to move with, and beefing up that offensive line, even with just tight end, assisting and blocking for Kyren Williams and kind of establishing that two-way offense with a rushing attack, as well as having Stafford and Puka and now another weapon in Loveland. So I think that'd probably be the pick I would most like to see here. But they really have been able to load up with rookies, and I would trust them to make a pick with the guys who are kind of on the board here, and expecting them to just take whoever the best player available is.
Do you like Loveland or Barron more, Owen?
Probably Loveland, just because even though I know corner was a bit of an issue, like they tried to go the Tre'Davious White route earlier in the season, that clearly didn't work out. I think that adding a tight end in, especially if they do lose Kupp, just getting another offensive weapon in that mix is going to be something that they're going to need to focus on. And I think that doing it cheaply through the draft is probably going to be their best case scenario. And even though it's not a wide receiver, I still think Loveland can impact that offense in a way that I don't think they really want to go out and spend money to try to fix through the free agency market.
So Bill put in the chat about quarterback here. And Bill, I don't hate that pick. I don't know. Like, Steve, what do you think would happen if the Rams did quarterback here?
I don't think it's crazy at all. I mean, Stafford, who knows how much longer Stafford's going to be there. He might retire now. So I think a quarterback could definitely be in play.
So, okay, so Steve, if you think a quarterback went off the board here, who do you think it would be?
I jumped in late. Who's already gone?
Ward,
Just the two.
and Sanders.
Well, as a Bears fan, I haven't really studied the QB class too much because for the first time in a long time, I don't need to. So I don't even know who my QB3 would be. Will Howard? I've watched a lot of Ohio State, though, and I think Will Howard might be a little high there. So, yeah, I would just – I don't know if they would need to take a quarterback, but I think quarterback would be in play for sure.
Oh, and how about you? If they took a quarterback here, who do you think it would be?
I personally, my next grade. So, both my top two graded quarterbacks are gone. I had Cam Ward significantly higher than Shadur Sanders, and I have Shadur Sanders in that same kind of bucket with Jackson Dart. So, if I saw a pathway for Jackson Dart to end up landing in the back half of the first round, it was going to be someone like the Rams, especially if they can bring Stafford back for another season. Let Dart sit and learn with McVay. I personally like the idea of if they do have to replace Stafford for next season, them going with a veteran option who has some experience in their belt, like a Darnold, like some of these other reclamation projects that I think McVay could really get the most out of, similar to some of his disciples have been able to do in Minnesota and with Baker Mayfield over in Tampa Bay. So I think that might be what I would suggest for them to go with. But if they were set on taking quarterback, I think Jackson Dart would probably be my pick to go here if they were dead set on taking one at the position.
Okay, so I'm seeing a lot of Jackson Dart in the chat. So we're just going to keep the draft going. We are going to go Jackson Dart at pick 26 to the Rams. And I want everybody watching this, when you see the end of the draft graphics, I want you to retweet the Rams because we are going to mock Brock Vieira, who's a writer for Rams SI. And he podcasts with us all the time. This is us. We're going to troll Brock Vieira with Jackson Dart in round 1. And he will definitely crucify me for letting them make that pick, but I am here for it. So, Josh, you are in the chat. So, Josh and Jake podcast every Monday with us.
Oh, yeah. JJ and Jay, Jim, Josh, and Jake every Monday talking Senior Bowl. We just covered like 40 running backs and linebackers within this last couple of months. But, yeah, hop in on Mondays for sure.
Josh, you can text your pick in whenever you've got it. And Josh, if you need to see the board, just tell me what positions you want me to filter. I think that's going to be his pick. So, Steve, what do you think for the Ravens here?
The Ravens, I'm leaning wide receiver. I mean, they got Flowers and not a whole lot else. So I'm trying to see who's on the board here. Can you go to wide receiver?
Josh asked me to show him corner and safety.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, wide receivers. Buka is off the board, Burden is off the board, and McMillan is off the board.
Ayu Manor still on the board?
He is.
Yeah, I would probably go. I think that kind of screams like just a Ravens pick to me. And they need a wide receiver, and it makes sense for where he's going. He should go, so that would be my pick.
So I'm letting Josh is probably checking his board and a few other things. And Alex, I do think that the Ravens need pass rush. I see Ravens fans complaining about their GM can't draft an edge rusher to save his life.
I was going to suggest that because Michael Williams is still there on the board, and it kind of just feels like the kind of archetype they go after. They went after the Jason Oways or Odafe Oways of the world, and David Ojabo. And with Kyle Van Noy being their most impact pass rusher this year at age 33, I think that they'd probably want to look to get younger and maybe try to find that more dynamic guy in the draft. So that would probably be where I would personally look at, but going with Barron here is also a solid pick.
Okay. So this is me picking for the Lions. And the Lions are actually, to me, one of the toughest teams to draft for because they've drafted really well. So I'm like sitting here thinking they drafted corners in round 1 and 2 last year, and they have a really good safety. So I don't think the Lions would go DB. They might go defensive tackle. Tyleik Williams here to the Lions, maybe. Steve, what do you think? You're probably more familiar with the Lions than I am because the Bears play them twice a year. What do you think their needs are?
I think they could use another pass rusher opposite Hutchinson. So, I mean, with Michael Williams on the board here, that seems like that would be a good – I mean, that's just it's not maybe the biggest need that the Lions have, but that's a guy who is super athletic and probably shouldn't be available here. So you kind of just take the best player available, and you have Michael Williams and Aiden Hutchinson, and you're going to be doing pretty good if Michael Williams reaches his ceiling. I think that pick in this situation makes a lot of sense.
Okay. And Commanders are on the clock. I believe it was Raj that was drafting for the Commanders. Have I seen the Commanders GM in the chat? So what are you guys thinking for the Commanders here?
The offensive line has played better this year, but I still feel like they're going to want to build around Shane Daniels. So I feel like offensive line, Brandon Coleman has played well at tackle, but you could definitely upgrade there. So maybe like a Josh Connerly would make sense. I love Josh Connerly. He'd be off the board if I was picking for any team in front of here. So
Jake, how about you? What are you thinking for the Commanders here?
Obviously, we covered the Commanders on Monday and just kind of how they've been blessed with this last year's draft, which has immediately put them into the success category. But when you look at Dan Quinn and what he wants to do on defense, it hasn't been put together this season. They're in the bottom half in every statistical category there is, and especially in sacks, they're at the bottom of the barrel. I think you could definitely upgrade there on the edge. Maybe this is a spot that you can throw a Nick Scourton in or a Jack Sawyer potentially and get a guy that can set the edge but can also rush the passer. And that's the route I think I would go here. And even though you probably got sniped with Michael Williams getting drafted right before you just still got to grab somebody at that position and add value on that defense so Dan Quinn can have the pieces to do what he wants to do.
So, Anthony, that's a reasonable suggestion. Even though the Commanders linebackers are playing really well right now, I would be curious. So everybody in the chat, do you have a true first-round grade on Connerly, Loveland, Scourton? Like, there's some guys here that I'm shocked have lasted till 29. And those guys would be Connerly, Loveland, Scourton.
They could definitely, I could definitely see the Josh Connerly pick happening for them just because you gotta protect that asset. I don't know if Colston Loveland would be a great pick for them or a great fit at this point in time for what they want to do there, but they at this point in time, you're just going best player available potentially with them having as many needs as they need to fill still, even with the success they've had. You just grab the best player and say, hey, we're going to make it work, and then you move on.
So I believe you make a franchise left tackle. This is an admin pick because the Commanders GM is not in the chat. I'm going Josh Connerly. Build your team, protect your quarterback. And Owen, this is like, in my opinion, a worst case scenario for Buffalo. You are on the clock.
Jim, you set me up for failure with this one. That's not being true though. I was hoping someone like an Alfred Collins would fall here. I'm not the highest on him. We covered on our Thursday podcast, me and Newt, for the Draft Professor. We covered defense tackles and interior offensive linemen. So I had my grades kind of all set up with those guys, and that was kind of the position class that the Buffalo Bills are probably going to be looking to improve on the most come up this offseason. But I think the fact that Nick Scorton is still on the board here, he's one of those guys who are the bigger body edge rushers who can reduce down inside. That's what McBean has always done with their picks. They like to get those guys who can use power and reduce down and limit or cut down on the angle to get into the quarterback. So I think a guy who can be a power rusher for them with Nick Scorton replacing Von Miller is going to be gone after the season, trying to find that guy opposite of Greg Rousseau. So even though it wasn't my number one pick, I do think that it worked out decently enough that he fell. I was a little worried that he was going to get sniped by Washington before that.
Okay. So the Eagles GM is working overtime. So he messaged me that he will not be here. And then the Kansas City GM also said that she can't make it. So for the Eagles, I'm thinking edge. And I'm trying to think like Howie Roseman. Does Howie draft Ohio State players, or is it only SEC?
It's only Georgia players to be defended.
If we're being true here, he would have traded up as soon as Michael Williams got to the 20s.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
It's not it's not a huge need, but I mean, Colston Loughlin's just in there. I mean, they could run some 2 tight end sets. I don't hate that at all, just because he fell to you. I'm not going to pretend to know all the Eagles' needs, and they probably have bigger needs, but that just seems like it would work.
So one of the draft professors is an Eagles beat writer. His name is David. David wants a tight end in round 2 or 3, but if Loveland's there, like Steve, I love that idea. I'm going to go Colston Loveland to the Eagles in round 1. And then I'm on the clock for the Chiefs. Ursery is there. And I'm going Ariante Ursery tackle to the Chiefs. So, first of all, I appreciate the podcasters coming on. So with the way that it worked out, Jake, I appreciate you being here for round 1. Definitely needed to hold the fort down a little bit until Owen got here. So thank you very much for doing this. This has actually been a lot of fun. That first round flew by. We got the first round done in an hour. So thank you. And then why doesn't everybody on the podcast take a minute to introduce yourself so everybody kind of knows who you are? And we'll start with Jake, and I've got to step away for a second because I have a phone alarm going off. But Jake, you want to take a minute and introduce yourself?
Definitely. Name's Jake Robertson. You can follow me at Glory Day Sports on Twitter /X. You can find me on the Morning Glory Show every Thursday morning, 7 Central Standard Time. Every Thursday morning, talking all things Titans and draft with my co-hosts B. Will and Jonathan Miller, breaking it all things down. Or follow me on Twitter and just listen to my shenanigans. You probably won't agree with half of them, but I'm at least fun to watch. And then I'll go ahead and throw it over to Owen to allow you to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. So I am a content creator here for the Draft Professor. I do the podcast every Thursday with Newt Weston. We cover D tackles, interior offensive linemen. We're now kind of branching out into some other things. We're covering wide receivers next week. I do have a YouTube channel, which I'm simul-streaming this stream on right now over at the Weekly Huddle, the Weekly Huddle podcast. I have on Twitter at Weekly Huddle. But outside of doing these simulcast streams, I'm not really posting that up on the YouTube channel all that much right now. I'm trying to get back to the swing of things as the draft has come around. Outside of that, I am currently working in the scouting department for the University of Buffalo football team. So I've been kind of in boots on the ground in the draft scene for the college realm. So I'm a little behind on catching up on all these draft prospects. So the fun part with me is being able to get these guys to watch and to come in and learn some of these guys. And you can see me kind of go through that process every Thursday with Newt and Jim.
Steve, welcome to the channel.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So my name is Steve Letizia. You can follow me on Twitter at CFC Bears. I'm a huge Bears fan, so I'm tweeting constantly about the Bears, but mostly tweeting about the draft. I have my YouTube channel, Chicago Football Connection. I'm doing the Building the Board project with OnTap Sportsnet. So you can read about they have Bear stuff, Bull stuff, Cub stuff. huge Chicago sports fan, obviously. If you follow me on Twitter, I'm always posting, videos, cut-ups of players. I also have access to all 22. So if anyone needs all 22, feel free to DM me on Twitter. CFC Bears on Patreon that you can join. I have over 400 games in there, adding every week. So yeah, feel free to hit me up there as well.
Cool. And Bill.
Absolutely. So you can find me on X at Sparks Scouting. That's where a majority of my content is housed. I'm also a writer and analyst for TWSN.net, the Right Way Sports Network, your premier NFL draft content provider, as well as I'm one of the draft professors here at draftprofessor.com, where we're using Jim's lovely mock draft simulator this evening, the most interactive simulator out there. It beats out all the other ones. In addition to that, for everybody that's watching on YouTube, make sure you hit that like button for us. Make sure you hit the subscribe button. Turn on that notification bell. We've got daily draft content. We're doubling down every night, 2 podcasts a night. We've got all sorts of fun stuff like mock drafts. We've got all sorts of fun stuff going on. In addition to that, make sure that you follow our lovely host and moderator, Jim, NFL Draft Fanatic, no I in Fanatic on X. Jim, since you are our Rich Eisen for the evening, our host here, I'll turn it back over to you, sir.
Yeah, being compared to Rich Eisen, that's humbling. That's humbling. So first of all, there are a lot of you that are joining us on a Friday night. Thank you. All of you. Thank you. So keep the chat going. Here's a couple of questions for the chat, just to keep things going before Bill is on the clock for Cleveland in round 2. Which players surprised you that they're still on the board at the end of round 1? Oh, and I love it. Absolutely love it. And that's what I'm thinking too. Any player that people are thinking they're surprised, but while the chats are coming in, Bill, you are on the clock for Cleveland.
Yeah, I'm trying to build suspense and drum up some suspense here at the start of night 2. It's Friday night, trying to get the fans hooked, but I've been working the phones for the last 6 or 7 picks, and nobody's taking my calls. They're sending me straight to voicemail here. I don't know if they just don't want to talk to me because I'm a Cleveland GM and I paid Deshaun Watson a bunch of guaranteed money, but here we are nonetheless. Let's cut the suspense, folks. It's going to be Jalen Milroe, the quarterback out of Alabama, with Cleveland hiring Tommy Rees as our offensive coordinator, his former offensive coordinator in Alabama. It's just a perfect fit. You get a veteran guy to start year 1, sit Jalen Milroe on the bench, and he's probably the opening day starter in 2026.
Okay, so I remember the Giants GM. There you are. So they call me Mr. U. You are on the clock for the Giants.
Dirty Bird, I see that offer for Kirk Cousins. I will give you a 5th, and we'll pick swap in the 4th, and you can call. Well, you don't have a 4th. You only have 3 picks. Let's do a 5th round pick, and we'll write it up. Send me Cousins, and we'll get it done.
So, Steve, at the end of round 1, any players still on the board that maybe surprised you a little bit?
Tyreek Williams for sure. I think I shouldn't say that because he is, more of a run stuffer, and even though I think he has more pass rush potential than he's shown, I think those kind of guys usually probably go early round 2 if a team doesn't believe that he's going to reach his pass rush potential. But I think he's just such a good run stuffer, and then you hope that there's going to be more pass rush potential there that he ends up going in round 1. Besides that, I didn't really see anyone else that was super surprising that didn't go in round 1. That was definitely the one that stands out.
All right. Well, I guess I'm on the clock here. So we'll go and dive in. The Titans are picking here. Obviously, they go Shador Sanders, the 101. We've answered the biggest question mark amongst the team. I wouldn't say it might be the biggest need, but definitely the biggest question. So here we're looking at right tackle potentially or edge. Those are the 2 biggest question marks. We have corner here. Corner's not a need, maybe the deepest position I think we have on the team with L'Jarius Sneed and Chidobe Awuzie and Roger McCreary, and drafting great rookies last season as well. I think this is a 2-man race at this point in time. And the Titans, they haven't drafted an edge in the first 2 rounds since 2018, being Harold Landry, who's the longest tenured Titan currently on the team still. So you have to address that position. You have to get out of the pass rusher. They tied 30th in the NFL in sacks generated this past season, tying Carolina Panthers, I'm pretty sure. So with this pick, I'm going Jack Sawyer, and I'm running the card in. He didn't have a great national championship, in my opinion, but he played very well against Texas, and I think he's very consistent. Back-to-back years, he's been very consistent. 8 sacks last season, 10 sacks this year. I think he adds the ability to set the edge and allows Harold Landry to be that cleanup artist that he's done very well. And when he was at his best in the game is when he had a co-partner on the left side or the right side that could take the attention away from him and allow him to beat people inside on stunts and stuff like that. So I think you shore up that with Tavondre Sweat and Jeffrey Simmons and Harold Landry, and you add Jack Sawyer on the other side and replace Arden Key. And I think you're happy with that pick.
So let me ask you this, Jake. Was there any thought to wide receiver here at the top of round 2 to get a weapon to pair with Shadur?
Personally, I know you love Alec Arminer. He's not high on my board. So if you're going that route, I just don't think the talent meets for what Brian Callahan and crew want to do there. You could look at a Savion Williams or a Jack Besh or maybe a Matthew Golden. I just don't think they match what they want to do for that scheme. So you're rolling Calvin Ridley back. You might throw a couple mil at NWI and Tyler Boyd, and you're just hoping you can develop for what you got and maybe find another free agent. T. Higgins did grow up in the Nashville area. I know that's going to be a guy that people are talking about a lot. I think he ends up back in Cincinnati more often than not. But if he doesn't, I think Nashville could be a target for him.
Yeah, so when you're on the clock, try to have your pick in. So the way that I envision this is the guys on the podcast will talk about most of the picks. But all the running backs are there except Genty, Michael. But have your pick ready so that we can just keep it moving, because obviously there's a lot of people waiting to make their picks, so to speak. But try to have your picks ready.
So
I have a question for the podcasters.
Sure.
Yeah.
So we were going through our list of players who we thought were a surprise to be in the first, and I kind of brought up earlier how I'm kind of still behind the ball and catching up on all these prospects. It kind of gives me a different perspective from when we come in for these different shows because it's my genuine first reactions with it. So why? What is our temperature and our feeling on Ole Miss's Princely? I'm not even going to attempt to say his last name. Is it Unman Mielen?
Unman Mielen.
Thank you. Because when I first laid eyes on him earlier this season, I watched 3 games. I watched Furman. I watched Furman and Kentucky, and I believe there was one other one. I don't have his sheet pull up in front of me right now, but I genuinely had a true first round grade on him after watching those 3 games. So I'm curious to see what everyone else's opinion is on him. I haven't updated my grade since I watched him a month or so ago. So I'm kind of surprised he's so further down on this edge list, and no one's really had the conversation with him. So I'd be curious to hear that kind of talked about here.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. He's my edge 6 on my big board right now, and to see him still here is pretty crazy. He's got a very good pass rush bag. His spin move is probably the best spin move of any edge rusher in this class, and just puts offensive linemen into a blender. I mean, he kind of reminds me a lot of a Yannick Ngakoue in the fact that he's a very good pass rusher. He still could use some help setting the edge. It's not like he can't do it, but it's going to keep him off the field on rundowns. But I'm shocked that he's still here. I would have thought he would have been in the teens at the absolute latest. He would have went to Detroit at the end of the first round. So to still see him here is pretty shocking. I don't know. Steve, Jake, what do you guys have on that one?
Yeah, he's a first round player on my board. He's my edge 5, I believe. I don't have him in front of me, but I'm pretty sure he's my edge 5. And yeah, I like what you said. I mean, the guy knows how to rush the passer. Like, you can nitpick his game if you want, but he knows how to rush the passer, and he has pass rush moves, and he's toolsy and bendy, and those guys go in the first round. You worry about his run defense later. You just draft him to get after the quarterback because you know he can do that. So yeah, now that I see that he's still available, I am surprised by him not being here. I don't want to talk about too much because I'm really hoping the Patriots don't pick him right now so I can pick him at 39. But I think I really like him.
I really think he just sits in the same tier. And for me, it's him, Jack Sawyer, who obviously I just took, so I have him slightly right now behind him. But then you throw in a Landon Jackson or a JT to a low owl, and it's that same little bucket. And it's just kind of pick your poison. I think they're all going to be decent at the next level, and it's just picking your scheme more than anything to me. I think they're all going to be great though.
Yeah, that's why I personally went with Scorton over him there at the end of the first for the Bills, just because even though I was looking to replace a guy like Von Miller, who is kind of the more bendy styling, in the past, the Bills have shown to kind of preference that power rushing style player over someone who has that bend. And Greg Rousseau is someone who can kind of unlock that a little bit more so. And Scorton kind of goes back to their original roots when it comes to these more big, powerful pass rushers. But if he was on the board, I was definitely going to hit him there with the Bills at 30. So.
Okay. So, Steve, you are on the clock. You have 2 of the next 3 picks.
All right, so we got Will Campbell in the first, which now that I'm seeing Wyatt Millen was on the board, kind of wish I would have gone in a different direction because I love Millen, and I feel like he would be that left guard. But if we're slotting Campbell in at left guard, and assuming we're going to sign either Trey Smith if he gets to free agency or Kevin Zeitler to shore up the other right guard, you got 2 decent tackles. The offensive line is going to be pretty good at this point, assuming you go there in the first round. So I'm looking defensive line now. Tyreek Williams is very, very intriguing because last year when Andrew Billings went down, the Bears defense completely fell apart. So they need to have a guy who can, fill into the rotation, a guy who can replace him if he gets injured, and also a guy who can replace him, following this year. So I'm going to go with Tyreek Williams. I think that is a huge need for the Bears, is someone who can stop the run, and he can do that. And then, like I said before, I think he's got pass rush upside too. I think he goes in the first round, so they're giving him at 39. I absolutely love that.
Cool.
Ooh,
So,
love it.
looking to
So
see if
let me
the
ask you this,
Saints
Steve.
Yep.
Yeah. So while Jim sees at the Saints GM, let me ask you this: would there be any thought to potentially a running back here over Tyreek Williams?
Absolutely. The only reason I don't is because we have I was actually thinking that with the 41st pick, I liked Williams enough where I didn't want the Saints to potentially draft him. But absolutely, with Ben Johnson, he doesn't like DeAndre Swift. We know that already. Roshan Johnson's just a guy. They need a running back. So I think running back's definitely in play with this pick. It is also a very deep running back class. So if you don't get one here, you got a 3rd rounder. You got, a later pick, you can get them. But for sure, I like Omarion Hampton a lot, kind of in that Dave Montgomery role. So he would be the guy he'd be a guy I'm kind of looking at one of these 2 picks.
And Steve, as a Bills fan to a Bears fan, I'm just curious because we were talking about the offensive line. You were talking about how your ideal scenario, you had your tackles, you're setting up a Will Campbell left guard, which I love. I have him as my number 1 overall interior offensive lineman because I think he probably slots better there than tackle at the pro level. So I absolutely love that pick for the Bears there. From one Bills fan to a Bears fan, I know he didn't play a lot this year, but we did send over Ryan Bates, who was kind of a backup center for you guys. In the small sample size you did get to see him, do you think he could be a potential answer for you at center? I know he was a big fan favorite when it came to one of those rotational linemen for the Bills and someone who everyone thought could be a developmental player. Obviously, they went with a different direction with Connor McGovern at center, and that ended up working out. But he was like the odds-on favorite by the Bills fan base to be their center this past season, as in the one we're currently in. So how did he look at all in his rarely limited snaps there, and what are you expecting him come next season?
Yeah, unfortunately he got injured pretty early on, didn't really get a chance. He didn't play center at all. I mean, we traded for him with the kind of the idea to play him at center, but Coleman Shelton kind of took that because he was injured, and then when he did play, he played mostly at guard, and he wasn't that. He was still the injury definitely affected him. He wasn't very effective, to be honest. I think he's actually going to be a cap casualty. That's what I would say. But Ryan Poles, the GM, absolutely loves him. He tried to acquire him twice, as you know. He signed him when he was a restricted free agent, then Bills matched, and then he traded for him. So he obviously loves him, but he was injured and he wasn't very effective. But at the same time, the Bears coaching staff and offensive line coach were an absolute mess last year. So I think with competent coaching, which hopefully we finally have, all of the offensive linemen are going to be a little bit better, and Bates might kind of do the same.
Okay, and Steve, you are back on the clock.
Okay, so we got Tyler Williams, Jaden Higgins just went off. Okay, so like you said, we're looking running back here for sure. Also edge. Those would be the two positions. So I'm probably, if I did take a running back, it'd be Hampton. If I'm taking an edge out of these guys, so one thing, it hasn't been confirmed yet, but it's sounding like Dennis Allen's going to be the Bears defensive coordinator. Potentially, that's kind of the leading rumor. And if Dennis Allen's the Bears defensive coordinator, we know he loves big defensive ends. So Landon Jackson obviously fits that. Raku, or if we pronounce that, doesn't really fit it. But I'm actually going to take. I'm gonna go with the defensive. I'm gonna go Jared Ivey here actually, because I have him actually a little bit above Landon Jackson. I know that's probably not a consensus opinion, but I really think, I really like him as a prospect in general. But like I said, Dennis Allen, he likes his edges to be bigger, and that's Jared Ivey, and he can set an edge, he can rush the passer. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Ooh, love to see
like
it.
that.
So,
just a couple things, like, guys, this is actually going really well. I can tell both from the amount of people watching the podcast as a part of the flow, and Draft Utopia. We will make board picks for you, Draft Utopia. We're not trading, so we'll just make the picks. But thank you for putting that in the chat. This is going smoothly. At least I would say it's like what I anticipated, which is about 2 minutes a pick. So if you have suggestions to either make it better, send me a private message at NFL Draft Fanatic on X. But this is tremendous, and from a podcast content standpoint, I think you guys are hitting it out of the park, just as you're talking about the players as they go off the board. So Steve just signed off. Steve, thank you very much. And we said show you available wide receivers.
Yeah.
Bill, while they're pontificating on this pick, do you want to go back and look at some of the past picks we were kind of talking over while they were being made?
Yeah, so we'll go back up to the Giants. So Giants go Donovan Jackson, O-line out of Ohio State. I say O-line because I think he can play tackle. He's earned the opportunity to fail at tackle, but it likely slides inside to guard. We double down on Ohio State with Jack Sawyer, edge to Tennessee. Jacksonville taking Xavier Watts is very sneaky. He's my safety one. And for him to fall out of the first round, it's not shocking, but it's surprising for me. The Raiders go Armand Membu out of Missouri. JTT goes to New England. Chicago takes Tyleik Williams. And it looks like the pick is in from Anthony with Wyatt Milam, the offensive tackle from West Virginia. Is that selection. Obviously, Saints went Jaden Higgins. Bears went Jared Ivey before that. Owen, has there been any surprises so far in this second round that you've seen? Anybody jumping out to you?
I'm surprised, and this is more so a me thing, that Donovan Jackson was still there at the top of the second there. He's my number 2 interior offensive lineman. I do have a second round grade on him, but the fact that he's looked as well as he did at left tackle after getting kind of the jitters out after playing against Abdul Carter in his first ever start at left tackle, I thought maybe that would bump his stock up a little bit, maybe have him sneak into the back half of the first. And another thing I'm a little more surprised about is the Saints going wide receiver with their second round pick there. I do like the pick with the player itself, and I can definitely see it working. Mm-hmm. And if you're going to want to help that Saints offense out, if you don't really have a quarterback here that can come in and fix all your problems, you might as well build up your offense to support the next quarterback that comes in, or even try to make who you have there work in the moment. So I don't hate the pick. I probably would have waited a little later on that one. Just because you have Rashid Shaheed coming back from his injury and you have Chris Olave. I do like the player in Higgins, and I like the idea. I'm just a little more surprised. That's probably more my biggest surprise so far in this early second round.
Okay, so I didn't see a 49ers pick come in, so this is going to be the admin making the pick go. They're going Benjamin Morrison. The fact that he got out of round 1, they need a corner.
Yeah. I'd say the fact that he got out of round 1 is pretty shocking. If that truly happens on draft night, then folks must be more scared of his medicals than actuality. And Dallas is on the clock here, which is me again. And I went offense in round 1 with wide receiver at Luther Burden. I'm going to double down on offense again, and I'm going to take a look at the running back board. And I'm going to go with Omarion Hampton from North Carolina. The fact that he made it by the Bears is just mind-blowing to me. So if he's there, I'm taking the pick. And shock, I'm on the clock again with the Indianapolis Colts. And I'm going to take a guy that I think is going to go in round 1, and I'm going to say that now, and probably it's going to come back to bite me in the butt, but it's safety. And it's a safety from South Carolina, Nick Emenwari, an absolute freak of an athlete. If he ends up in Indianapolis, that's what they look for, is athletic guys. So I think if you're the Colts, Tyler Warren and Nick Emenwari back to back in rounds 1 and 2, that's a steal of the draft. Owen, what do you have on that one?
I think that's a great pick, and especially with the Colts there, I think they just needed some talent overall. They have their strengths, and you looked at players who were on the board that you think could have went there, like Iominer and some of the other offensive weapons there. But I think that the Colts specifically have some good pieces there that you're not particularly looking to move on from or to upgrade on there. So going defense there, I think, is a great pick. I think the pick next with the Falcons kind of already established it with my question to the room earlier, but I think that pick is also pretty high level. And we're seeing now a lot of these defensive players go here that probably got pushed down from the fact that there was a run on D tackles earlier, and we had that kind of top of the line wide receivers with T-Mac, and if you want to count Travis Hunter as well as Luther Burden, we had some guys in Emeka Buka push some of these defensive players down, and we're getting some really good picks here with some good value with players who we thought would be borderline first-round picks, if not solid first-round picks. So I'm definitely liking some of these more defensive oriented picks that people are going to be kind of sleeping on a little bit because they're not as flashy as some of these offensive picks we got going earlier.
Yep, absolutely. And I'm back on the clock again with the Arizona Cardinals. Obviously, I went Alfred Collins in round 1 at defensive tackle. I'm going to flip to the other side, and I'm going to go to the offensive line in the trenches. Wide receiver is a conversational piece, but I think the class is deep enough where I can get him later. And I'm going to mainly look at guard. I'm going to go Jonas Savanea at guard. I think he can play tackle, but in this case, Arizona is going to take him to play guard and sit right in front of Kyler Murray. The fact that he's still here, he's my offensive line number 2 in a first-round grade, so it's a great value for me. I'm going to take it, and I'm going to run with it.
Definitely love 7A. I thought he could play tackle. I originally graded him out as a tackle. And before we went into our final rankings of our interior offensive lineman on the Thursday podcast with me and Newt, I ended up switching him over to interior offensive lineman. I feel like that's probably going to be his best possible, like, maxed out position. But I think if you play him in tackle, you're totally happy with that. So you're getting some positional versatility there for the Cardinals. You can really get your best 5 out there and not have to worry about guys who are only limited to playing certain positions like you have in the past with guys like Patrick Paul. They took a swing on Cody Ford. This is probably what they were hoping to get from him, except even better because I think he can actually play tackle. So I do think this is probably going to be what the Cardinals have been looking for in years past, and other past regimes have tried to add to this offensive line.
Yep. And I think if you're Miami too, you're punching the air right now because you were ready to run the card up for Sabanea, especially with the fact that they just need guys in front of him. And I know they went Josh Simmons in round 1, but the offensive line in Miami is just a little bit of patchwork, and they need guys inside and out. If I'm Miami here, if I am the Miami GM, I'm probably looking at safety as much as I don't really want to look there because I need somebody there. You could look at a Makuba, maybe a Kevin Winston type of guy. You could also probably look at potentially tight end. A guy I love still on the board is Harold Fannin Jr. The fact that he's still here when he's got first round hype for me, guys like Gunnar Helm out of Texas, if that's the way we want to go as well. So, Owen, what do you think Miami would be doing here in round 2?
Yeah, I'm torn here because Miami has a safety problem, like you said, but I don't really love the value for it here. They had Jordan Porter starting for them through in spots for this season. I know he would come off a little bit more often because he just was playing so poorly. So I do think that safety is probably their biggest position of need right now. Just before free agency, before we know what they're going to try to do to attack that position, they've already addressed offensive line in the first round. So I do like your thought process with that. You also want to go after guys who are going to be able to get after quarterbacks in your division. Now you're going to be playing against Josh Allen and Drake May and potentially whoever the Jets have coming in. So I think defense, especially after going offensive line, which was your biggest weak point, is going to be your biggest need, and I think safety is the biggest of all the needs on D-line after taking Chop Robinson in the first round last year.
Do you like Makuba or Winston more here, Owen?
I'm personally a bigger Makuba fan. I've also followed him for his career a little bit longer since he was at Clemson before Texas, and I've liked to see the growth he's shown after going from one spot to the next and still having that kind of athletic upside. So I do like that pick there for them. Unfortunately, as a Bills fan, that sounds pretty good for them.
Yeah.
Yeah, Greg, it was definitely good seeing you. Thanks for stopping by, and you should see us. We plan on doing this nearly every Friday. It will be different people in the podcast, but it's going to be the same concept of just fans drafting for their team, us talking about the picks. So, Greg, thanks for stopping by. Bengals are on the clock. Ryan Sparks, are you still here?
Yeah,
You guys
Bengals are on the
keep
clock.
talking.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that we don't often think about too is we get through this second round, there's a lot of still talented guys here. And I think it's because we don't really have a lot of top first round grades. And there's for me, there's a glut of really talented second and third round guys that are eventually just going to start pushing guys down the board. Landon Jackson, he's a first round guy for me at edge. Alec Iomanner, first round guy for me at wide receiver, but I know that's not necessarily the consensus. There's a lot of talented folks here. Owen, is there anybody that's still shocking you that's still on the clock right now?
For me, especially with where we're at with this pick, I know the Bengals, I think the first pick in their first round was wide receiver to complement
It was
Marquez, if I remember
interior
correctly.
defensive line.
It was interior defensive line. Okay. Okay, so yeah, so with the leaving, that's a great pick, by the way. With the leaving of T. Higgins, I would like to see maybe an Io Manor here, or you got some interior offensive lineman options like Gray Zabel and Seth McLaughlin is one of my guys. So I would have liked to see one of those guys here, but going with adding more beef in that defense to kind of complement what they do best, especially after getting torched as much as they did this past year with Landon Jackson here from Arkansas. I think that's you can't really go wrong with a pick in that area.
Yeah, no, and I don't blame you. I have Landon Jackson as a first round pick for Cincinnati, so I had them taking him in that first round. So I think for them to come and get him in the second round is excellent value. And we don't talk about it enough. They just hired a new defensive coordinator in Al Golden. He's going to want to bring in some of his own guys to run his style of scheme. So they may be different from what they've had in the past. And it looks like Riley for Seattle throws Shamar Turner in there again, another one of my first round guys, my guy in this defensive tackle class at Shamar Turner is he shouldn't be able to move the way he does. And it definite my guy there. Looks like Owen, what do you have?
I put Turner in. I didn't realize that wasn't the pick. So Riley, you ended up getting Turner. I thought you were putting your pick in. Sorry about that, Riley.
Which either way, I think either way, if he gets Turner or Fannin, I think either one is a great pick for him. So you could look either avenue. I think Turner on the defensive side of the ball or Fannin as an outlet for Geno Smith, I think it would be a great pick. Denver's on the clock here now. And Owen, what do you think Sean Payton and company are going to do to try to support Bo Nix?
Well, they already kind of did that in the first round. I believe this is the team that landed Ashton Genty. So I do believe that was one of the best picks of that first round, is because it's just value for how good the player is at the position. And then you bring him in. Their running game this year was kind of weak overall. They didn't really have a guy who was kind of that main horse. I'm a big Javonte Williams guy, but that injury really kind of took him out from where I think he could have been in the NFL. And wasn't the biggest Audric Estime guy. So adding Ashton Genty in the first round in this draft so far was great. I think a wide receiver probably would have been what I would have looked at here. There was no guy outside of I think only one receiver on the Broncos this year had 41 catches. So if you're going to look to maximize Bo Nix, I probably would have went wide receiver here. There are other spots on this team that I think I would continue to add to, but I think supporting Bo Nix, your rookie quarterback, your defense was great this year. That would probably have been my pick here with the Broncos, just continuing adding talent to the offense.
Yeah, which looks like they ended up with the steal of the draft and Jihad Campbell at linebacker, and I can't really fault them for that pick. The fact that he's still here, I think something would be seriously wrong on draft night if he falls this far. But Pittsburgh's on the clock, and this one's me. And if I'm Pittsburgh, and I hate doing this to kind of project things out, but I'm saying Russell Wilson makes his way to Las Vegas to go play with Pete Carroll. Justin Fields doesn't re-sign. So now I've got to look at a quarterback here. And if I'm looking at quarterbacks, obviously my first four are already off the board. in Ward, in Sanders, in Milrow, and Dart. So I'm going to go with QB5 as an older prospect, but it's the Maple Missile from Indiana. It's Curtis Rourke. I mean, he's got the arm talent. He's got accuracy. He's a little immobile, but part of that was he tore his ACL and then decided to play the entire season on one leg. So I can't really fault the kid for that. That's a green check mark for me. But I think Pittsburgh is going to probably end up attacking quarterback early on here in this NFL draft. But,
I do like that pick. I was a fan of Curtis Rourke when I first laid eyes on him back at the beginning of this kind of process. I fell off the bloom fell off the rose a little bit for me as the season went on for him, but I feel like that was also an effect of him slowly succumbing to that injury in his knee. I do think he's a little more mobile than most people give him credit for because of that injury there. So I do think that's a good pick. It's a little rich for my blood with this, I think, and also my next best quarterback would have been Quinn Ewers, just because I feel like he has some of those elements that I think Rourke just lacks when it comes to. I'm not the biggest fan of his natural arm talent. It's there, and I think Quinn Ewers is not the best when it comes to that, but that's just my personal preference. But I do think the idea of going quarterback there, these Russell Wilson contracts talks that started today, they may not go anywhere, and Justin Fields never really proved to you that he wanted them to be. Well, he didn't really look like a generational quarterback or someone who could be a consistent starter for them. So despite the 4-1 record, I do like the process there. And Curtis Rourke is somebody that I am personally higher on than a lot of people. And even with me being a little bit lower on him than where he's taken here, I can definitely justify it. And with the way the Steelers are looking to go with their roster there.
Right. And I think if you're Pittsburgh and you have both of your guys walk. Go ahead, Jim.
Oh, no, I'm going to let you guys keep talking. I'm just going to keep making sure that the picks get made. Carry on, you guys.
Okay. No, you're fine. I think if you're Pittsburgh's roster, how much of a rookie project, quote unquote, do you want to take on? And Curtis Rourke's probably one of the higher floor but lower ceiling guys. He's not going to give you much more than what he's got, but he's going to be a guy that you win with and not because of, if that makes sense. He's not going to lose you a game, but he's not certainly not going to win you one either. And it looks like Green Bay comes out with Maxwell Hairston, the corner from Kentucky, and then the Chargers going Harold Fannin Jr. out of Bowling Green. Owen, I'll turn it over to you. How do you feel about Harold Fannin Jr. going to Los Angeles?
Working for a team that plays in the MAC, he was absolutely terrifying this year. He's a stud. I remember seeing him when he put up those kind of massive numbers against Penn State was kind of where I really got my attention drawn to him there. So I think that's a great pick, especially with where they're lacking when it comes to offensive weaponry. You have a guy in Ladd McConkey who's going to be your kind of stable number one-ish receiver. I don't know. I'm personally think Ladd McConkey isn't just a slot guy, but with Ladd being your wide receiver weapon, you're going to have to add some more around Justin Herbert, so he's not forcing balls as much, and having a tight end there that he can kind of trust. He hasn't really had one there since Hunter Henry left. So grabbing a guy who's an athletic freak like Fannin, who can come in and be an impact player in that passing offense for them, I think is a great pick there.
Absolutely. And I think, and Jim hits the nail on the head there. Brian, we appreciate you to not mock draft and drive. We know we're all fanatics here at the Draft Professor, but we want to make sure that we mock draft safely, folks. Please remember, no mock drafting and driving. But Buffalo's on the clock here, and I believe that was you as the Buffalo GM, Owen. So I'll turn it over to you.
It is, and I am a little I'm a little trying to find the right word for this. I have, in preparation for next week's episode with Newt, when we're covering our wide receivers, I'm currently working my way through this wide receiver class, and the one I haven't gotten to yet is Matthew Golden. So I don't know is one of the players and is the best player available on the board for the Bills according to the mock draft simulator here. I don't want to make this pick specifically just because I'm not really sure. I wouldn't be able to contribute as much with the conversation, but there is a receiver I would. And I have been thinking about how the Bills taking, especially if he's going to be here in the second. And Jim, I like the thought, but it's actually the one right below him in Isaiah Bond from Texas.
Whoa.
The Bills really are lacking that kind of speed element to their game. And if you want a big play threat, you're going to look at a guy like Bond who has that speed to attack downfield. Their fastest player on their offense is Curtis Samuel, who has like 4.39 speed, but isn't really active on their offense until the playoffs this year. And without being, even when he's not hurt, they don't really use him as that stretch player. They use him more in those gimmick touch situations. And Khalil Shakir, who has 4.4 speed, is more of that slot guy who can attack over the middle of the field. So if you get a guy who can stretch the field and attack downfield with speed, and Bond, I think, even though he's not a complete player right now, and I don't love his entire package at the moment, I think he brings an element to this Bills offense they're missing here. And putting that with a guy who has a cannon arm, Josh Allen, is always going to make it more fun of anything, especially earlier on there.
Wow. Yeah. So Buffalo taking Isaiah Bond, it's a shock because, I mean, if you'd asked us 4 months ago, it's a shock that he's here because he would have been a first round talent. But for him to fall this far, the blooms kind of come off the rose on Isaiah Bond. There's been a lot of drop concerns. There's been not much concerns outside of the speed. I see where your head's at. Buffalo does need to get faster and get a better wide receiver. But I think that I probably would have gone with a Matthew Golden. I like him just a little bit more. They're actually right next to each other on my big board. Golden above Bond right now. But it looks like we might be starting a kind of a wide receiver run. And Anthony coming in with the chat, Bond over Io Manor as a Rieger over Jefferson vibe. And I feel it because I have a first round grade on Io Manor. I think he's young, 6'2", 210, probably runs a 4.4 40, really good hands, probably the most violent run blocker of any player in this class, and that includes offensive linemen. Like, I'm pretty sure his run blocking is a war crime in certain countries with the way he just vicious. But no, I see where your head's at with Buffalo, and I think it would be very fun to watch Josh Allen just throw 4 verts to Isaiah Bond and just Isaiah Bond running a straight line and don't stop running until you're in the end zone. But it looks
there
like
was thought here from. Yeah, there was thought there to take Io Manor. And I do like Io Manor as a deep threat player there, and I do think he is genuinely one of my favorite players. Even though I don't have him as super highly graded right now, I have him as a solid second round player. He's right there with Bond for me in my grading there. I think with Io Manor, he's able to stretch the field despite being 6'2". He can get down the field. But they already drafted a guy like Keon Coleman, who's that X, who they already have someone where their plan for him is to have him stretch the field down the field, even though he's not that true 4.4 speed. They're expecting him to go down the field, and even if he doesn't get over top and stack, he can win 50-50 balls downfield. And I feel like Io Manor kind of fills that similar role in the offense, even though he brings it in a kind of a different way than Keon Coleman does. So if we didn't draft Keon Coleman this past year, I would have been all over Io Manor over Bond. I just think Bond brings that different skill set to the Bills wide receiver core than what Io Manor does. And I don't want to be too repetitive and too make their offense have too many of one kind of player that there's not a lot of opportunity for Io Manor or Coleman to see the field there.
Yeah, no, I love it. And it looks like the Lions are on the clock now. And Jim, I'll throw my hat into the ring. I threw it in round 1, but Marcus Mbu from Purdue has the ability to play all 3 slots in the interior, guard and center. Obviously, the guards are getting a little bit older. Could play tackle as well. I could see him going round 1. But, Owen, where would you think Detroit would go if they didn't go Mbu from Purdue?
I was kind of hoping a guy like Io Manor fell to the Lions here, kind of coming in and taking over that Tim Patrick role, and just thinking about him and Amon-Ra St. Brown run blocking as the wide receivers and that offensive line is just a hilarious thought in my mind. It would just absolutely bully every single cornerback in the NFL to the point where they would kind of just pull Vontae Davis, retire at halftime. So I that's a fun thought to me, and especially because they can upgrade that Tim Patrick spot, and with they already have kind of guys who complement what Io Manor does well. I did think that would be a great spot, but since he was off the board, going with a guy who can be offensive lineman, you're going to look to try to have to find places to get cheaper with the Lions and having all these stud players. And I think getting a guy who can play multiple offensive line spots, but doesn't need to start right away with Mbao because you already have talent there. But then as soon as you find a spot for him to come in, I think he would be a good pick for them just to be able to slot and give them some more flexibility with cap stuff and having their offensive line be able to still be one of their better strengths of the team.
Love it. Love to see
it.
And
you are back on the clock.
All right, so we've gone edge rusher with Nick Scorton, and we've gone with wide receiver Isaiah Bond for the Buffalo Bills. We've covered 2 of the big issues that the Bills fan bases have with the team, what they're kind of lacking when it comes to what they're going to be expected to lose in the offseason with edge rusher with Von Miller, and just what they're to some part with Amari Cooper, they don't bring him back at wide receiver. So I do think we've covered two of their bigger losses that are going to occur this offseason. The only other one I think I haven't hit on so far has been defensive tackle, and that should be my realm of expertise, having run that podcast weekly with Newt going over and covering all these players that are going to be D tackles coming out in this draft class. And while I don't think I love the pick value to like where they're picking the round, they're picking late enough in the second round. I think I'm comfortable enough grabbing my guy here, and I'm going to go with the one that Jim has been hinting at me all process here, that the Bills have been scouting out specifically. I'm going to go with DeMonte Capehart, the interior defensive lineman from Clemson here, which we're still not sure if he's coming out yet, Jim. He's like put a waiver in to try to get like a 5th or 6th year or something like that.
I did not know that.
So so I hate to break your heart, but he is returning to school.
I
saw that. We'll remove him. Okay.
Yeah.
I saw that waiver claim the other day.
Yeah, the waiver claim you're referencing got denied, to my knowledge, from the people I've spoken with in and around the South Carolina area. So as of this moment, by my knowledge, he's returning to school. But just so people know who he is for next year, I'll let you gush over Capehart.
Yes. So despite returning for one more year, I think Capehart, and if you wanted to go with the guy here, like De'Anni Walker, I'm not the super biggest fan of him here, but with Capehart, you're getting a guy who has some athletic upside at D tackle. Is one of those run stuffing guys who can play with good leverage, attack with his hands, stack and shed blocks, and it really brings a run defending one tech style player that the Bills defense is really lacking, especially if they're going to be rolling back the effectiveness of Oh, Jim, I'm blanking on our one tech D tackle. I don't know why. Daquan Jones. And as Jim has mentioned a lot of times on our interior defensive line podcast on Thursdays, is that the Bills have no one tech D tackles under contract. I believe following this season, or is it next season, Jim?
Jones is the only one under contract for 2025, and we would have none under contract.
The Bills have this massive need at one tech. You get a guy in Capehart who can come in and rotate in with Daquan Jones, has some more pass rusher upside than some guys that I also think could fill that role, but are a little less with the athletic upside, like a Nazir Stackhouse later down the board. So I think Capehart can come in and really plug and play with that need at one tech that the Bills have. And if they were able to grab him, if he was coming out in this scenario, then I think they would have nailed all three of their biggest needs so far with their first 3 picks in this draft.
Absolutely. And while Owen was talking about Capehart, so Kyle Kennard from South Carolina, the edge rusher, making his way to Philly, and then Trey Amos to Kansas City, cornerback. That's a sneaky one. I think it's a very sneaky one at the end of round 2. I've seen some round 1 buzz on him. Owen, how are you feeling about Trey Amos here at the end of round 2 for Kansas City?
I have seen that same buzz, and we've seen this with the Chiefs a ton of times where they're able to just kind of pounce on players that you are getting buzzed to have coming up, and like they're you expect them, like we see that with like a Nick Bolton at linebacker and some past players that were falling for one reason or another, and they're able to scoop them up despite having super late picks in these rounds. So like basically a 3rd round pick here, they still get a guy who had buzz in the 1st rounder, and you'd expect him if someone with that kind of buzz to go in the top of the half of the 1st. And there is that need at corner for the Chiefs, especially because they're platooning, and being a Bills fan, prepping for this AFC Championship game coming up in the weekend. We're talking about, Trent McDuffie, absolute stud. I love Trent McDuffie. And now opposite him, they're kind of having a platoon between Justin Watson, and I'm forgetting the other corner's name, but the other corner was the one the Bills specifically picked on in their first matchup when they handed Kansas City their only real regular season loss of the year. So you have instead of having to platoon those 2 players, Justin Watson, even though I think he's the better player, isn't all that great, and I think you'd rather have him be your 3rd corner than your 2nd starting on the outside. So having someone like Amos come in, and you can hopefully have him come in and not be a number 1 shutdown. He can be your number 2, and if anything, you have Justin Watson start as your number 2 and have Amos slowly work into that starting lineup. So I think that's a great pick for them, especially with the kind of buzz we're hearing with Amos in that 1st round kind of range.
Absolutely. So after those, it looks like the New York Giants go Cam Skattebo, running back from Arizona State. Definitely a good pick for the New York Giants, getting Cam Ward a weapon in the backfield to go with Tyrone Tracy. Savion Williams out of TCU making his way to Kansas City, like Mr. U said, getting some thunder in the running back room. I'm on the clock here with Cleveland, and I'm going to keep it rolling with running backs. In this scenario, Chubb signs an incentive-laden deal, and I want the best wide zone runner in this class. Jim's highlighted it. I'm trying to build suspense, but it's Caleb Johnson out of Iowa. I could have been comfortable enough to take him in round 2, but to get him here in round 3, he's the best wide zone running back in this entire class. But let's roll it back a bit. Owen, how do you feel about Cam Scadaboo at the top of round 3 here for the Giants?
I love it. My buddy of mine was a huge Tyrone Tracy fan coming out of last year, and he finally kind of turned it on, and I didn't hear the end of it, as every time he had a big game for the Giants this year, and all the games I was able to catch of the Giants, he definitely was someone who popped on field. And the reason he fell really was because of that size. He's more of that lightning quick guy who isn't really going to be playing with a lot of that physicality. And they tried to roll out Devin Singletary this year as that kind of thunder to his lightning. And that's not really his game. He's more of this shifty jitterbug style running back who, while it's still dense, isn't the best when it comes to taking on contact and being that power element. So getting a guy like Cam Scadaboo who can come in and absolutely obliterate the D-line with just power. He also isn't a total liability in the passing game. He's not somebody who, just based on broadcast watching, I haven't been able to break down the film on Scadaboo myself personally, but just watching the kind of plays he makes and having that contact balance, he's able to play in the receiving game and attack downfield. In that way, he can be a guy who's out there for 3 downs. I know Tracy dealt with some fumbling issues and some injuries this year, so having a guy who can come in and if Tracy does go out, can take over some of those roles as well is a great pick for the Giants. And even though I do think Scadaboo could be a solid receiving player, if you have a guy like Tracy who can be that guy for you on 3rd downs and don't have to force Scadaboo to play that more of a weaker part of his game, then that's a great compliment. And you're really supporting Cam Ward with a great run game, which is always going to be something that you want to support a young quarterback with, is some elements of the offense that take pressure off of them.
Okay, so we're going to do 2 teams back-to-back because there's a couple questions in the chat. So New England's on the clock. It's an admin pick. They've gone Travis Hunter and JT Tuimoloau.
I am pounding the table for Gray Zabel here. Absolutely.
Okay. I have to no. Did I put him in the database? There we go. He's in there as a guard.
Yep.
Okay. And then
that Patriots offensive line was just tragic this year.
Yeah. So there was a question by the person picking for the Jags. Can you guys discuss the running backs that are available and which ones you like?
Yeah, so I can take it first. So the running backs that are still available, you have guys Quinshawn Junkins and Travion Henderson, the duo from Ohio State. Different styles of runners there. I'm not particularly sold on either one. If I'm picking here, there's a couple of guys that I like. Taj Brooks from Texas Tech. He's a bowling ball, violent runner. Think like a Jamal Lewis type during his heyday with the Browns and Ravens. Or Dylan Sampson from Tennessee, just an absolute out-and-out speedster. Definitely a very good pass catcher out of the backfield, and that Tennessee offense didn't showcase it as much as you'd like. I think if you're Jacksonville and you're looking at running back, you're going to want someone to probably pair with ETN and Bigsby, or if you move off ETN, then you're going to want someone with a little bit quicker speed. Probably a Dylan Sampson type here is what you're going to look at. But Owen, what do you think the Jags do here at running back in round 3?
Yeah, it really depends on what their kind of offensive system they're going to want to run. And they brought in, I'm blanking on his name right now, the offensive coordinator from the Bucs. He was just
Liam Cohen.
Liam Cohen, thank you. And they have shown success, Cohen has, with having guys like Rashad White and now with Bucky Irving. Some of these guys who I personally liked both of them. I liked Bucky Irving was my running back 2 last year. I was a big fan of his, and that pick is really paying dividends at this moment in time. So I think guys like that, I do like. What I liked personally about Rashad White was about his ability to have kind of this one cut style where he was able to stretch it out and then hit upfield. And I think a player who does that really well for me is Kyle Monangai from Rutgers. He's a guy who I can see he's able to plant and shoot upfield. He's not the most physically talented, but he runs angry. He has some burst, and he's able to hit that and be one of the better one cutbacks in this draft class. And as well, I wanted to shout out the Khalil Mullings. I'm not the biggest Khalil Mullings fan, but his story is awesome and is someone who has some super big upside when it comes to the running back position. He was a former linebacker at Michigan, and eventually he ended up taking away snaps from Donovan Jackson. He's a converted linebacker to running back. He's relatively new to the position, has athletic upside, plays with the violence that you expect from a running or a linebacker playing an offensive position now. So if you want someone who's just going out there and can just create chaos and be someone who brings that kind of physical element to your offensive running game, I do like Khalil Mullings to bring that to some guys. And as well as we don't want to forget, I know he had a really down season this year, but Ollie Gordon was someone who had a lot of hype coming into this season. And I haven't dove super super deep on the tape with him, and I'm really excited to do that once we end up getting towards running backs, especially for like this podcast when me and Newt do some of our breakdowns. We ever end up getting to that position class, but Ollie Gordon is someone I'm curious to see how he fared out after having a rough year. What the tape truly said when you look down to down, because he definitely showed some stuff that you don't just lose from one season to the next. So he's another guy I think might be a sleeper in this class.
And then one more that hasn't been mentioned, that if you were here at the beginning, Jake was here podcasting. Jake's RB3 is still on the board, and that's RJ Harvey. The pick is Judkins. But shout out, seeing RJ Harvey go in round 3 should not surprise anybody. So the Saints are on the clock. Is the Saints GM in the chat still?
And we'll take a look. I'd love to dabble in RJ Harvey. I'm not as high on him as Josh is, but he is high for me. He's a very good violent type of runner. He's kind of like Mark Ingram when he was at Alabama. And I'm not saying he's a Heisman level guy. He's a 4th round guy for me, but I'm saying in the style of runner that RJ Harvey is, he's that Mark Ingram type of guy that he'll grind out the yards, but he's also got the speed to take some top off of things. But I think there's a lot of talent still left on the board, and it looks like the Saints GM Smooth is here looking at defensive tackle is what I'm hearing for the Saints GM, which on the board right now, defensive tackle, Deone Walker's still here, TJ Sanders, Riley Mills, which is Newt's my guy that he's pounded, flipped the table for, put it back together, burned it, lighted on fire. Like he would probably drive himself to Notre Dame to drive him down to Bourbon Street if they went here. But Owen, what do you think the Saints do if they're looking defensive tackle here?
Yeah, we want to pop back over to the first page there, Jim. Again, being one of the guys with Newt who covered all the tackles for this for this channel here, dedicated to anyway. There's some interesting names still left on the board here. Deone Walker, a lot of people had him as like a top 10 or easy 1st round player coming into this, and I wasn't there for that hype train. So when I first laid eyes on him, I kind of wasn't surprised with what I saw, and him still being here doesn't surprise me all that much. But if you're looking for a guy who has a bunch of talent and you're just looking to add talent into that defensive tackle room, you could grab him, especially here in the 3rd round. So I think having a guy who has that size, who has that talent, but you really need to put it all together, is someone that could be a pick here. Ty Hamilton, more of this 3-tech run defending player. I do think he could be someone that if you're looking to have pass rush from your edge rushers and just really have some solid D tackles, that could be a player there. But Deone Walker would definitely be who I'd be leaning towards a little bit, just from knowing what the Saints have currently along that D line and looking to have players that can have that upside, especially because they're looking for players that can also impact them down the road as they're going to clean up that cap space situation, as they're going to try to probably lose some games in the coming seasons as they have that roster turnover with this kind of head coach regime change. You're going to want guys who have that kind of long-term prospect with size and athleticism and ability. You just need to coach them up and put them together. And I think a guy like Walker could be someone who is that long-term player that comes in, and you're kind of surprised he gets there. Similar to what they've tried to look at before with like Peyton Turner and guys like that, who are these super uber talented guys that just need to kind of put it all together.
So here's a question. What kind of running backs would be like a Jahmyr Gibbs clone that Chicago might want?
I would say Dylan Sampson from Tennessee. I gushed about him earlier. He reminds me an awful lot of Jamal Charles when he was at Texas, and that same one cut, hit it and go type of guy. That's what I would say. Owen, you got any different spins on that one?
No, I think that's a great observation. There were some guys on there that you used to look at and you're like, okay, these guys are more of these power style runners or who can really grind it between the tackles. Not going to really look to have them be that kind of player. So I think Sampson is probably the best case scenario of what we were looking at the moment.
So the Raiders tackle in round, was that round 2? Yeah, tackle in round 2. And did they get a quarterback?
Yeah, they took Kyle McCord.
Okay, so and that's right. This is the Raiders' 2nd, 3rd. So they have McCord, Membu, and McMillan.
T-Mac, yeah.
So let's look at the 3rd round edge board.
Yeah, I would
Do
say.
you guys imagine Braden Swinson falling to round 3? Just everybody in the audience, how many people here think Swinson's round 3?
I definitely can. I think the two names that I'm shocked are still here in round 3 for edge is Donovan Ezaraku and Ashton Gelote from Louisville, because I think those guys, Gelote's got a motor that just doesn't stop, doesn't quit. He does a lot of the things you don't see pop up in a stat sheet. Does need some work on, his run defense. Ezaraku is a pure pass rusher. You have concerns if he can put his hand in the dirt with how he's sized, but he can just get after the quarterback. Owen, what do you think about this edge group still here?
There's one of my guys here that I think if you're looking to find someone who can play edge, 'cause I know the Raiders currently have Max Crosby, and they also have UB's own
Khalil
Malcolm
Mack.
Kuntz there. Malcolm Kuntz is the opposite edge there. Khalil Mack
sorry.
is still pondering for retirement at the
So
moment. But yes, Malcolm Kuntz paired up with Max Crosby. Maybe a Khalil Mack homecoming could come in. But one of my guys that's still available on this edge board is Jordan Birch, kind of this rare 290 plus pound player who moves on the edge well. I think it's someone we saw a player like this who was weighed in at that heavy of a player, but played on the edge with a much lighter movement and frame than what you'd expect from someone who weighed that much in Tui below 2 at USC, which I wasn't the biggest Tui below 2 guy when he was coming out, but seeing how he's succeeded at the NFL level. And seeing a guy like Birch reminds me so much of him as not just the physical profile, but seeing how he wins as a pass rusher. I do think that's one of the guys I think could be someone who comes in, and if you have a need a D tackle, you could put him at that 5 tech or a 3 tech and would be fine with it. But I really, as like a 5 tech or even like an outside shaded edge rusher would be someone I'm kind of looking at here when you're getting to the back end of the 3rd round.
Okay. So I want to reply to this. So Cole, while we don't think it's realistic, like based upon your board, my opinion is one of the reasons we do 32 person mocks is Darian Porter is still on the board, everybody. Nobody's picked him, right? So there's a reason that he fell. Like he's either not high enough on somebody's board or the team need was higher than corner. So I don't necessarily know that this is unrealistic. I don't think it's consensus that Porter is a top 50 player. That's my opinion. I think he's top 100, but I don't think he's top 50.
Yeah, I would say he's probably top 110 for me. He's right outside of that top 100, kind of the honorable mention type of guy. There's just some stuff on his tape that he's just got to clean up at the next level. But I think Cole also hit the nail on the head there. And Noel Williams out of Cal is a guy that's not being talked about nearly enough. When we talked about him, me and Randall, when we did DBs, this is a nitty gritty type of corner, really good in man coverage. Good return skills too. Alex called it out in the comments. This is a guy you could put on special teams. He kind of reminds me, and I'm going to date myself with this comp, but Al Harris, when he was with the Green Bay Packers back in the, the 90s, 2000s range, that type of nitty gritty corner that checks a lot of boxes for you. But not being realistic, I think we're going to start to see it. It's going to start probably at the middle point of round 1 and probably go all the way through the remainder of day 2. We're going to see a lot of high variance guys because with this draft class, there's a lot of teams that have 2nd and 3rd round grades on certain prospects over others. And I think that's going to be something really, really good guys that would end up here at day 2, in San Francisco, taking TJ Sanders out of South Carolina, the defensive tackle. That's a guy that some folks I've seen talk at, the top middle part of round 2. So to get him in round 3 here is pretty good value. Dallas is on the clock, and that one is me. I'm playing in Jerry world. I wish I had his money, but my first 2 picks, I went running back. I went wide receiver here. I'm going to be looking at edge for this one. I think they want to get a little bit younger in the edge room. And I'm going to be going with Ashton Gelote out of Louisville. This is a guy I could see in the top 40 selections. So the fact that he's still here is criminal with the ability to rush, the ability to keep that motor going. And he's not a perfect prospect. He's probably a low ceiling, high floor type of guy. And Dallas needs those types of guys. But Owen, what are you thinking about how the board's fallen out this far?
I think for a team like Dallas, this is kind of their best case scenario. They ended up being able to get a dynamic wide receiver in the first round. Even though with Luther Burden and the fit there with CeeDee Lamb, they do both kind of fill a similar niche where I think Burden's gonna be able to be used a lot in those gimmick touches and around sweeps and kind of that high athletic slot outside wide receiver hybrid, similar to what CeeDee Lamb offers for this Cowboys offense right now. But I think maybe if you add a guy like Burden in, you can diversify what CeeDee Lamb does as opposed to having to be the only guy in the offense that can do anything dynamic with the ball in his hands. So you get a guy like that in the first round or any other wide receiver. That's a good debate we can have there. You still end up with Omarion Hampton in the second round, and then you're able to come back around and complement a guy in Micah Parsons with another edge rusher there. And there's still a couple edge rushers on the board that I really liked. So I didn't think you could really go wrong with that pick there, especially with the position that they need and was kind of an abundance after we had that early run in the first round.
Yep, absolutely. So I'm back on the clock here again with the Cardinals, and then I'll have the Colts here shortly as well. But for the Cardinals, I've put it off long enough. I've been looking at wide receiver. I need to get someone opposite of Marvin Harrison Jr., and I want someone who can stretch the field vertically, and that's a big body guy. Jim's already highlighted it. I'm trying to build suspense for you folks. I'm trying to be the Mel Kiper, Todd McShay here and build some suspense, but Jim's just like, hey, I'm going to highlight it. It's Pat Bryant, wide receiver, Illinois. Probably the best vertical receiver in this class for a guy of his size, and he's really going to open up some eyes here. But looks like the Commanders on the clock now. Owen, if you're Commanders GM Adam Peters, where are you leaning here?
What were the first couple picks for the Commanders? I'm trying to recall.
Yeah, so the Commanders, I think, were me. So I picked Jack Besh in round 2, wide receiver out of TCU. And round 1 was Josh Connerly. So we've hit tackle, wide receiver. For Commanders, excuse me, did I say tackle? Yeah, we did tackle, wide receiver. If I'm the Commanders, I'm still either thinking tackle, edge, or tight end.
I'm thinking so with the Besh that kind of covers wide receiver because you have the Luke McCaffrey there and you already have Terry McLaurin. I definitely think offensive line is where I'm looking. Even though you added a tackle in Connerly, there's a bunch of guys on the board still that I like in these positions, especially someone who may be more interior focused, that is Connerly being more of that tackle type of player. Clay Webb is definitely one of my guys. You have a guy like Dylan Fairchild, who I think Fairchild is this higher upside player. You have a Tate Ratledge, who is kind of this more ready to go player. Unless I'm getting them flipped in my brain, I do believe is Fairchild the one that had the 10 starts, Jim, if you can recall.
Yes, it was. And also, by the way, for the audience to know, if somebody's talking like Bill and I've got a receiver highlighted, or Owen's talking and I have an offensive lineman highlighted, that is because when we're doing the podcast on the different positions, I have a gut instinct is that I know who they like. But carry on, Owen.
Yeah, Clay Webb and Fairchild are both guys that I think fall in that same kind of bucket where they're both high upside athletes. Clay Webb was, I believe, a Georgia original recruit before transferring to Jacksonville State. And you see that on his tape where he's able to move and play with power. He just needs to really clean it up. And if you're getting a guy like Connerly in, hopefully Sam Cosmi can be back relatively before the playoffs. But I'm not really expecting much coming from him. And you have a guy like Fairchild, who was a starter for Georgia, started for 10 games for them this season. And he's just super high upside. You can tell he had a wrestling background. He plays with great leverage. He just needs to kind of tone up those technical issues there. So I think I'm going to go Fairchild just because I think he has a sooner path to playing. And if we still don't have Cosmi, I trust Fairchild to come in and step in and play quicker than Webb is. But I think that you can't really go wrong with either of those guys, especially if the Commanders continue to add to the offensive line of free agency.
So the Colts went safety in round 2 and tight end in round 1.
Yeah, so Tyler Warren round 1, safety Nick Emenwari round 2, Colts on the clock round 3. And I'm going to give a shout out to Parker Blake. Parker, if you're watching, I want to thank you. This is one of my guys at cornerback, and it's a guy that's going to start rocketing up boards, but I'm going to butcher the name, Azareye'h Thomas from Florida State. A long arm athlete, very tall. He's a great athlete, great frame. There's a lot of things he needs to clean up technically, but it'd be a home run pick for Indianapolis to get him here in round 3. And the Bengals are on the clock. And I don't know if Ryan is in the chat or not. Anthony chiming in, Cam Williams in Cincinnati. I don't hate that. I think that's actually a pretty good pick. Owen, what do you think about that one?
I definitely think that's somewhere they can go. They had their offensive line issues this year. They had Cody Ford starting from the right tackle at one point against the Ravens. So even if you have guys that you like on your roster that maybe were not healthy for that game, and you're expecting to come back, having more offensive linemen can never hurt, especially if that was an issue throughout the season and it kind of raised up. So I definitely think that's a great pick there.
Yep, absolutely. And looks like that's the pick that ends up. Seattle's on the clock here, and Seattle's had somewhat of a good draft. I know, obviously, the question mark is how much is their head coach going to have influence wise on getting his own talent in the Pacific Northwest when you have guys like, Kyle Hamilton, and you go to Seattle and you don't really have those guys. But where do you think Seattle ends up here, Owen?
I really like the pick that Riley sent in here with the idea of going wide receiver. Lockett is aging, and you're probably going to move on from him. And Noah Fant is probably going to be a cap casualty just because you don't think he's worth paying right now. And so you have a guy like Trey Harris coming in who can be kind of that more dynamic athlete at wide receiver. I know we're going to get into this next week with me and Newt, because I know Newt's opinion on Trey Harris differs very widely from some other things. I've seen Trey Harris as high as wide receiver 3 on some people's boards. And I know where Newt stands. I'll let him talk about that more next week on Thursday. That's called a teaser, folks. But I do think adding wide receiver is going to be a good move here for the Seahawks, and having Trey Harris still be there is probably their best pick there.
Yeah, so I'm back on the clock here with Pittsburgh, and I went quarterback in round 2 with Curtis Rourke. Round 1 was wide receiver. So I'm going to look at defensive line. I think, when we talk about defensive line, there's 2 guys that I'm having the conversation with right here, and it's either Darius Alexander or it's Riley Mills, because I want to get younger on that defensive line. And shout out to Newt. He's going to hate me for this one because he probably wants him for the Packers, but I'm taking Riley Mills here in round 3. This is a guy I've started to come around on, and I think Pittsburgh's going to end up taking him and putting him in the heart of that defense. Owen, you've hosted Thursday nights with Newts for many a season now. What has he told you about Riley Mills that we haven't shared with the class already?
He would have been pulling out his hairs for every player drafted as a D tackle from the beginning of the second round on that wasn't named Riley Mills. I know, especially with me taking like Capehart and Walker, he was probably just absolutely screaming at his screen if he was watching along, because Mills, despite he was knocked out a little bit at the end of the year there with an injury, and you hope he's going to be back and fully healthy to go for when the season starts. But Mills is a player that comes in and can bring kind of a higher floor to a D tackle room. He has some good dynamic abilities to him. I think he can control the point of attack pretty well with his hands. And I again, withstanding if he comes back from his injury, I don't want to assume anything there. He is somebody who probably this is where I would be looking to take him. I had a 3rd round grade on him. I felt that he was solid all around. He's a high motor guy, high IQ, has the power, has the size. And you can really see some upside with him, because I think technically when it comes to run defending and pass rushing, he has some room to grow there when it comes to how to weaponize his hands a little bit better and how to use his legs more and get his eyes on the ball. So even a guy with as much talent and as much like grit and high IQ and leadership as a guy like Mills has, he also has some upside when it comes to drafting him and looking at that ceiling for what kind of player he could be on your interior defensive line. So I really do like that pick there. And I know Newt is that's his boy, right after his other boy in Trey Harris. Shout out Newt there with that one. But yeah, I think he would absolutely love that pick for the Steelers, and even love it more if it was the Packers 4 picks later.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And what's crazy, my comp for Riley Mills, Cameron Hayward. The same thing that Cameron Hayward did when he was a young Pittsburgh Steeler, Riley Mills did for Notre Dame. And I think that'd be a great pick. And Anthony coming in with Tampa Bay here, Darian Porter, Iowa State, he's a wide variance guy. This is a guy that some folks have round 1. This is a guy some folks like me have him in round 4. There's a lot of things that he does well. He does a lot of good things in man coverage well. He does a lot of good press coverage well. Kind of similar to he's a tough comp to make for sure. But this is a guy. I believe he's at the Senior Bowl. Correct me if I'm wrong. And I think he's going to open up some eyes if he is there. But Owen, how do you feel about Darian Porter from Iowa State?
So this is someone I actively added to my list as soon as the Discord started because I saw 8th overall player on a board in the comments, and then he was still available here. You have him as a 4th round guy. I know I've definitely been high on some corners like that in the past. I was a big Cam Smith guy coming out of South Carolina. I felt like he got drafted a little lower than he was, and he's kind of let me down a little bit, and he's been a little bit of a disappointment for me, but I still have some hope held out for him. So I definitely like seeing players like that are super wide in range. I haven't gotten any eyes on him, so I'm really excited to get in on that. If you had to give me like a one sentence synopsis or like summarize his game in like a short little soliloquy, how would you describe his game to me so I know what I'm getting into when I dive into the tape there?
Yeah, so if I'm talking Darian Porter, this is a physical, tall corner, really good in man and press. I know Cole absolutely loves him to death. I think he said he was in the top 10 on his board. Anthony, in the chat as well, 35th on his board. He's a big man cover corner, just like that. I'm not sold on him. I think some of his press techniques get a little grabby. I know that was a very long run-on sentence. Just pretend there's some commas somewhere in those sentences to take a breath. But yeah, big man cover corner is what you're going to get with Darian Porter. But he's a wide variance guy. There's teams that are going to love him in top 10, top 15. And then there's teams that are going to say, I'm not touching him until day 3. And it looks like the Chargers have sprinted a pick to the podium. It's Travion Henderson from Ohio State. And Owen, how do you feel about that one?
Jim Harbaugh going to Ohio State player is interesting. It's interesting there with the Chargers. But I don't know. Their running back room is one that kind of confuses me a little bit. I think in this range, end of the 3rd, going into day 3, I think that's where you could see the Chargers definitely add a running back with someone like Henderson, who I think could have gone a lot earlier than this. Falling there, I could definitely see it. They have guys who had great seasons, like I believe it was J.K. Dobbins was the kind of revitalization there this year. And they have a guy like Kamani Vidal, who they invested a draft pick in last year, who didn't really get an opportunity to play all that much this year, but someone who you'd expect them to want to try to get touches to next year. But if you have a guy who J.K. Dobbins, while he did have a great season, they really were banking on players who had injury histories to stay healthy and come in and be dynamic. And you can't really just keep on banking on that every single season. So you can bring J.K. Dobbins back again and hope he can repeat that. But if you have a guy like Travion Henderson sitting there on the board, where I think that'd probably be a steal from where I have him currently graded, I think you have to go ahead and make that pick because it just fits with covering your bases for if Dobbins gets hurt, and he plays a similar style with that kind of hard-nosed running, has a little bit of juice in him, but not too much. And as well, he can, if Dobbins doesn't get hurt, he can be a great change of pace back for whatever the Chargers want to do. And I know they love running the ball and they love grinding into teams. So that's just a great 1-2 punch, if anything.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I pause you guys for a second?
Go ahead, Jim.
So as people, I appreciate everybody putting into the chat, hey, I want to see this position, etc. If you're curious why the board isn't always the same, right? This is not the first time somebody's looked to see corners. So the simulator is interactive. So the player that team picks, like if a fan's doing a mock draft, that player moves up that team's board. But that doesn't move them up the other 31 boards. So don't always assume that the corners you're looking for are on the first page. Because, like, for example, if somebody were to say pick Quincy Riley, the simulator is going to take the 4 guys that are not Quincy Riley, and it's going to move them down, which means it might move them below Kobe Bryant. We don't know that, but it might. So there's an algorithm in play to try to keep the players that the fans pick the most to the top. So that's what's going on. So if you're asking to see a player board, this simulator isn't linear. It's not always the same board that you're going to see from pick to pick. That's why you see, I mean, granted, Mason Taylor's been at the top of the board for a while for nearly every team, but and Kevin Winston's been up there too. But if you look, Jalen Royals has not been this high for every team, right? And same thing like Barrett Carter. Those players are there because people probably picked them when they did a mock draft for Jacksonville. So
Yep. And speaking of corners, I broke the news in the chat earlier, but I just did get a double confirmation. Davison Ibinason from Ohio State will be returning to Ohio State for another season. So he will be going back to school when we talk corners. But Jacksonville's on the clock here. And where do we think Jacksonville's going? Do we think they go corner? I don't know if they went corner earlier, and I might have missed it. Maybe with Will Johnson at round 1, I think might have been their selection. Owen, what do you think they do down? What do they do down in Duval?
Well, so we talked about, so we had safety with Xavier Watts. I do believe Will Johnson was the corner at 5 there, and then we did go running back, I believe, earlier in this round with Judkins. So we're hitting on a bunch of places that I think that they're having needs and are going to be able to add players on there. I do think they could continue to add in the defense. I know they have some pieces along the defensive line. Never hurts to add more players, especially because of how rotation heavy the defense is in terms of contrasting it to the offense. I love my guy Jordan Birch still being there, and they do have this affinity for the players they have on defense being these kind of longer limbed guys who can condense the run lanes. So I do love the idea of Jordan Birch there. I'm just curious to see who the D coordinator is going to end up being with the Jags. I'm sure it'll be someone who's going to like what the talent pool they already have there is. And with that being the case, I'll probably go ahead and take Birch just because he fits that mold and has that ability to play along the line there and be kind of this more versatile piece for them, as well as playing into the strengths that their edge rushers already kind of fit into the mold there.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think Birch still being here is a little shocking. I know if I'm Jacksonville, I got to give some sort of conversation piece to interior offensive line to guard, just because that inside of that offensive line, you've got to be able to open up more holes for Judkins now and Big B, and you got to protect Trevor Lawrence a little bit. So I might look at like a Clay Webb here, even a Luke Kandra. Another one of Newt's my guys. I'm sure. At this
and you're
point,
talking about Houston?
Did Jacksonville already pick?
Yeah, as soon as Owen, and I almost called you Newt. I wasn't looking at you. I just almost called you Newt. Sorry about that, Owen. As soon as Owen said Jordan Birch, I put that in. Going with the idea that when we're in rounds 2 and 3, the picks are going to come in faster. For Houston, though, I do like the Clay Webb. Right, because we haven't done interior. Houston's my pick. We haven't done interior offensive line for Houston, and that may have been the reason they got bounced out of the playoffs.
Yeah,
no.
That and trying to block
Houston here.
George Karlaftis with a tight end.
Yes, yeah. No, Houston here. It's Clay Webb or it's Luke Kandra. Either one, I think, is a good pick. And the Rams on the clock here.
And this is an admin pick, so I believe the Rams have done. Is it Jackson Dart, and that's it?
I believe you're correct. I believe it's just Jackson Dart, which I would probably look at offensive tackle to get a left tackle to protect Jackson Dart. The problem is at this point in the draft, there's not a whole lot. Cornelius is probably your best one if you're looking at left tackle. If you want to scroll down the board just slightly.
They're also going to need a corner.
Yeah.
I was going to suggest looking in the corner here.
Yeah, I don't love the value at tackle there. I think corner, I love Kobe Bryant and Quincy Riley. Both of them are my guys of this class. Kobe Bryant's a little light, but he's just a baller. And Quincy Riley is he's kind of similar to a Greg Newsome in Cleveland, does a lot of really good things for you. Anthony at this point is just trying to flip the table over for Luke Kandra. That's Newt's burner, guys. That's not Anthony. He's lying to you. But yeah, I think if you're the Rams, you got to go corner here. I think you want an offensive tackle, but the value is just not there. Owen, if you're looking at corner here, what are you thinking?
I do want to shout out one of my guys, and it's not just because he was a former Washington Husky in that national championship run team, but Jabbar Muhammad is one of my guys in the corner room here. I know he was towards the top when we last looked at corner. Yeah, they're from Oregon. I really like him. I think he's a decent athlete. He's able to have some hip fluidity and get some speed. His zone instincts aren't the best right now, and I think you could bring him in and have someone like him be your slot corner, someone who's willing to defend the run there. I'm sorry, I just saw Newt has entered the chat.
Newt has entered the chat after all the Green Bay picks. Newt's here.
After Newt Riley Mills went top 10. Don't worry about it. Don't double check our work.
Yeah,
but just to finish up with Muhammad, I think he could be a guy who comes in and could compete right away at nickel corner with Quentin Lake, and eventually maybe move outside when he starts getting that more zone concepts down. I know the Rams do like to run a decent amount of man, which I think plays into Muhammad's strengths more than his zone does right now. So that's a guy I think could be a benefit to them even right now, as well as progressing to someone further down the road for outside corner.
So Draft Utopia, you got for New England, you got Gray Zabel and Ozzie Trapilo in round 3.
I love me some Ozzie Trapilo. I think him going in round 3 is a war crime in at least 15 countries, but I digress. Baltimore's on the clock right now, I believe, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And we just gushed about Kandra for 20 straight minutes. Did anybody ever end up selecting Kandra?
The Kandra is still on the board. The Ravens took Ratledge in round 2. And they took Barron in round 1. So let's have a third round wide receiver discussion. So if you are in the chat, who do you like as a round 3 top 100 wide receiver? And while the chat is coming in, and I know, Owen, I know that you're still working on your wide receiver board. Is there any wide receiver that you've watched, Owen, that you think is worthy of a third round pick right here?
I do want to shout out, he's slightly lower than third round for me, but somebody who I do think could work into the spot is Torrey Horton, kind of in similar in tandem here with Riley in the chat there. Horton, for me, I have a kind of a different take on what I think he could be for a team, but just looking at him, bare bones, what he does bring and what you do have at wide receiver for the Baltimore Ravens, you have Zay Flowers, who's this more dynamic player who can be this firecracker guy, move around your offense. And you have another guy in Rashad Bateman who has some more of that route running ability and is kind of a more typical Z receiver. And Torrey Horton has that size that I think the Baltimore wide receiver room is really missing, and something that they were relying on their tight ends a lot to give them in the passing game. But if you can have a wide receiver that also does that, so you can be in kind of some lighter looks and really challenge defenses who are ready to play against this kind of smash mouth offense, I think a guy like Torrey Horton could be someone who can come in and play for them. And I do believe they were having issues with their return game towards the end of that season. Daquan Hardy was on their team and he was hurt going into that Bills game in the playoffs. So they had an unproven, I think he was either undrafted or some lower level player on their roster returning punts for them. And I think Torrey Horton, that's another pathway I can see him to impacting a team. The next level is being as a returner. So I think Torrey Horton fits a lot of different spots on their team that I think he would fit well for.
So, Bill, what receivers are here that you still have a third round grade on?
So there's one, and Anthony hit on it in the chat, and I'm going to gush on him. It's Jalen Royals from Utah State. I've got a third round grade on him. This guy's dynamic with the football in his hands. He's the type of yak monster that we always talk about. You give him the football in space and watch him go to work. He's very good and reliable, quick passing. 3-step drop, ball comes out like on a slant, and he can take it to the house because he's got that long speed that you look for. And he's got a really good quick start-stop. This is a guy that can get in and out of his breaks very effectively, would be a really good field stretcher for Lamar Jackson. The big thing is he's got reliable hands, which is probably the biggest thing that Lamar Jackson needs. He doesn't really need a fast guy. He doesn't really need he needs a guy that can just catch the ball. Riley hit on it right there. You just need a guy that can catch. Like, if he can grab it, he's good. And Jalen Royals can do that for you. And Torrey Horton can too. The only thing that concerns me about Torrey Horton is the medical aspect of it, just because obviously there's been some injury histories with it. But I think either one, if we're here, Jalen Royals or Torrey Horton in round 3, I think would be excellent fit. Jalen Royals is another one of those high variance guys that we often talk about. I've seen folks that have had Jalen Royals in round 1, and I've got him in round 3, and I know some folks have him in round 5 or 6. Owen, if you're looking at a Jalen Royals type of speedster guy, is that somebody you'd have higher on your board, or you'd probably have him lower in the round 4 or 5 range?
He's someone that I have lined up to cover now. I'm definitely crunching these wide receivers in anticipation for that next week's episode. And some of the guys that I'm really focusing on getting to right away are these higher variance guys like a Trey Harris, shout out Newt in the chat, and a guy like Royals. So I haven't gotten to Royals, but I've heard very different interpretations of what he is as a player, kind of like how you touched on. And I like how I'm thinking I'm gonna be more in line with where Bill is here. Again, I can't speak too much on it because I haven't been able to go in there and find that exact spot where I land with him yet. But I do think that he's going to be an interesting player to discuss when I finally get into that this upcoming Thursday.
Yeah, no, I absolutely. I'll put this comp in your head before we move on to Anthony's pick with the Jets and Ricky White. When you watch him, think Randall Cobb for the Packers. The same things that Randall Cobb used to do for Aaron Rodgers, that quick, long speed guy that just was sure-handed, that 3rd and 7, Rodgers would throw the slant to Cobb and it's a first down somehow. That's what Jalen Royals is going to be at the next level. But speaking of wide receivers, Anthony Russo goes Ricky White from UNLV, another guy that, there's somewhat of a variance, round 3, round 4, round 5 is kind of where he's at. But this is a really good special teams kind of guy. Does a lot of things nitty gritty that you ask for. The size is a concern. I think 5'9", 180 is what I've seen. I've seen differings on size, so I'd want to see some verifieds. But I like him. I just don't know if I like him in round 3. He's more of a round 4 or 5 guy. Kind of reminds me of like a Darnell Mooney type of guy. But it looks like the Saints went Cornelius. And Owen, have you seen anything on Johnny Cornelius out of Oregon in the offensive line group?
Before we go to Cornelius, let's give a commercial here to Owen and Newt. So if you want to hear more wide receiver discourse, Owen and Newt in the chat have a podcast at 9 p.m. Eastern every Thursday. And this Thursday, they're doing their wide receivers. And Owen, you want to kind of give them a tease as to how you're going to do the wide receivers, because it's not going to be your normal wide receiver big board. So, Owen, you want to tell everybody what you and Newt are cooking?
Yeah, so me and Newt wanted to do a different kind of interpretation because we had done previously where we just kind of line up our boards and talk about the biggest differences, the higher variance guys, when we just do the full rankings after doing weeks and weeks of talking about 5 offensive linemen and 5 defense tackles at a time. And so now we're switching it up and going to a different position we haven't covered yet, that me and him are both kind of just hammering that position and really getting our boards filled out to be able to talk about this. And we didn't want to just talk about the same 5-10 guys that everyone's going to talk about towards the top of the board, even though in this year's class it is a little bit more variant to who's going to be in that top 10 discussion. So we are going to cover our top 5 guys, but in addition to that, we have different categories that we're going to be able to slot guys into. The top 5 is excluded, so you're going to see the guys who are in the top 5 appear in these categories, but we have different categories based on the kinds of receivers they are. So you have your, win at the high point, contested catch kind of guys. You have your slot typical receivers. You have your rack type receivers and your kind of gadget guys there. And we're going to rank those guys by their individual traits and qualities and where we see they fit more so when it comes to like their skill sets, as opposed to so the top 5s for each of those skill sets, we're going to rank those wide receivers. And for a quick little tease there, that's why Newt was saying he was very interested to see talk about Horton, because I have Horton placed in one of the categories that Newt has in the opposite category, basically. So we are going to have two very different interpretations of who that player is, based on what we've already kind of teased with each other in our rankings that we've been looking at as we've adjusted them heading into that podcast episode. So you're going to be able to see us talk about different players, and not only just what kind of players are the best wide receivers at those positions, but look at them in different ways and kind of project their roles in the NFL and which player is going to be best for that kind of role. So if you have a specific need at wide receiver, but for a specific role on your offense, you know exactly what kind of wide receivers to look for those roles specifically.
Yep. And I want to give a shout out. We have 6 picks left, so I'm going to take a pause. So every single one of the podcasters, Owen, Bill, Steve, Jake, the amount of work and the amount of tape that they have had to watch to be able to talk about players for 2.5 hours. Okay. Give a follow to all the podcasters, please. You guys, like Owen, Bill, and Jake and Steve, who aren't here, you guys definitely knocked this out of the park. I didn't know how good this event was going to turn out, but I can definitely tell you we're doing this every Friday. It's going to be different people in the podcast seats. So if your board is thorough enough that you could talk about it the way that these guys did, just reach out to me at NFL Draft Fanatic on X and let's get you involved. But I want to give guys, I'm very thankful, very humble that you guys are on the channel doing this. This has been really good. So, like, you guys need to give yourselves a round of applause, you know, and I know, Owen, you were hustling home from work and stuff like that to get here at 7. All of that is not lost on me. So I appreciate everybody in the chat, and I definitely appreciate anybody that is grinding enough tape where you can either put the comments in the chat or you can literally talk about it for 2.5 straight hours. Okay, like, great job, everybody. So that being said, Bill's on the clock with Cleveland at the end of round 3.
Yeah, so on the clock with Cleveland here at the end of round 3. But before I do that, with us having so few picks left, let's do a little housekeeping, folks. If you're still watching with us, make sure, if you're watching on YouTube, like the video. Make sure you subscribe to the Draft Professor YouTube channel. Turn on that notification bell so you get notified of all of our daily draft content where we double down 2 nights a week. Like Jim had talked about with Owen and Newt and their wide receiver specials. We've got all sorts of content. Make sure you follow me over on X at Sparks Scouting on X. You can also check me out over at the Right Way Sports Network. That's TWSN.net. Owen, you can find over on X at Weekly Huddle. He's also got a YouTube channel, which I'll let him kind of dive into. Jim, you can follow him on X at NFL Draft Fanatic, no I in Fanatic. And make sure you're using draftprofessor.com. Jim's talked about it, and he showed it off for almost 3 hours, folks. This is the most interactive draft simulator that is out there. I don't care what PFF's got. I don't care what PFN's got. NFL Mock Draft Database. They don't hold a candle to what Jim's built here. This is interactive and fun. But before I turn it over to Owen so he can cover his channel, Browns are going to go tight end here, and they're going to go Mason Taylor, the tight end from LSU. They're going to want to run a lot of 12 personnel with David Njoku and 2 tight end sets. Get a Mason Taylor in there who can catch and block as well. Owen, I'll turn the keys over to you so you can cover what you've got and where people can find you.
Yeah, so I'm pretty active over on Twitter. If you ever, at me at the Weekly Huddle or just DM me or anything, we can always have a discussion about different prospects and things like that. When it comes to the YouTube channel, it's been kind of dormant. I released some stuff back last draft cycle, and I'm going to ramp up more so when it gets closer to this, when I have some opinions. I have a video whenever I have time, probably this Sunday before championship weekend, where I'll be able to film something and get something out there. So we're going to be ramping up, especially with more of the draft-related content. I'm going to be trying to devote as much time as I can to getting as many players watched so I can contribute even more so to this program. And just not only is Jim providing us a great platform, because even if someone like me who isn't currently looking for a job or a space in the draft or in sports media coverage kind of thing, it is always great to be able to get to work out there and be able to show that you can do this kind of stuff and put some stuff in your portfolio, have stuff out in the online to be able to refer to that you're able to do this and balance this, and this is the kind of stuff you can do if you ever want to flip into that. And as well, Jim gives us stuff and allows us to work with this and be creative and create our own kind of coverage we want to do with this, as well as helping me use this to generate some push and to really get me in my prospects and stuff done. So I have enough guys to have scouted to not only contribute to these videos and be able to make my own videos when we eventually get pumping over there on the Weekly Huddle YouTube channel over at YouTube. But also because I'm personally in the scouting world when it comes to trying to get a career. I'm in personnel. I'm looking to try to move into the pros and stuff, and having a portfolio where you have guys full write-ups down and you're really looking to kind of show your work and what these kind of guys are doing. This is kind of a good way to come out here and sharpen my skills, hear other opinions from other people, and then go back and rewatch these guys, get those kind of perspectives. So it's really a great community we're building here, where Jim is allowing people like us to come out here and show you guys some of these lower round guys or the top 150 where you're not going to get just the same top 32 guys repeated over and over and over again. Misses are relevant. We are looking at all these guys that are going to be not just the top of the cream of the crop. You're looking at guys that you're going to fill out your NFL rosters. NFL rosters are built from rounds 2 through 7, not just round 1. So we are coming out here trying to give you that service as well as we're getting stuff in return. And Jim's a great guy. All the other podcasts I worked with have been great. So I'm really excited to keep putting some work into this on Thursdays and whenever I jump in on Fridays or whatever other days that I'm able to hop on here. I definitely will be in the chat and come next Friday because I'm going to be shooting off some of my new fresh wide receiver takes because that'll be the day after me and Newt kind of go horn to horn on these wide receivers, including Torrey Holden and I'm assuming Trey Harris.
Right. And again, gushing on Jim, I've been in the draft space for, about 10 years, watching tape, grinding tape, on average this year, I've got over 400 players on my big board, right? It graded, they'll call me the comp king, but, I have a comp for every player on my big board, but, Jim's really done a great job with this, mock draft simulator. It's been the most interactive simulator we've used. But now that we're done gushing, we've got some picks that came in, as we've been talking here. I believe I saw Kansas City went Chris Paul Jr., linebacker from Ole Miss. Minnesota Vikings took Luke Kandra, which if you listen closely, yeah, I was to say, if you listen closely, folks, that's the sound of Newt breaking his phone in half that he now has to play Luke Kandra twice a year. I think Jim did that just to see if Newt will chime in on X. He'll just retweet the video and just break his phone.
Well, so first of all, I made the Luke Kandra and Chris Paul picks for a couple of reasons. So first of all, I'm picking for Philly. I believe they need a linebacker because I believe Vaughn is a free agent. Mm-hmm. So there were two reasons. The Eagles need a linebacker, but second, Chris Paul's family watches this podcast. So if this is the podcast channel that the players are watching, you should be watching it too. So Chris Paul, if you are watching, the fact that your family retweets my tweets, like, you're awesome. And then Luke Kandra, the Vikings need interior line, right? But second, Luke Kandra's family watches this podcast. And we know that because when Newt podcasted about Luke Kandra's family retweeted the podcast. So again, if the players are watching the podcast, you should be watching it too, right? I need to give props to every single podcaster at the Draft Professor. And you see Anthony in the chat, right? And Anthony and Bill were doing a lot of stuff behind the scenes to get this thing going at the beginning. This event could not happen without Anthony in the chat and making sure that there was some tweets going out about who the picks were. And it definitely worked because we have a lot of people watching. So Anthony, props to you. But we've seen Newt pop into the chat. Cole, Brian Maffey did. Those are all guys that podcast, and actually you'll be able to see Anthony and Brian tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Eastern. The three of us are going to be doing probably a 2-round mock. So we're going to be podcasting a 2-round mock with some different people. But everybody at the Draft Professor, you can catch Jake and Josh. And Jake was on earlier. Josh was in the chat. They're on Mondays. Tuesdays is Randall. Randall's not here today because he's driving his son to the Bills-Chiefs game this weekend. Wednesday, you can catch Bill and Jake, or I should say Bill and Jacob. Their podcast on Wednesdays, Newton Owen on Thursdays, and every Friday is going to be this. It may not be a 3-round mock draft, but it's going to be us talking about a number of players. And as Bill and Owen have said, for people to talk about the top 175 players, all the players are going to be taken in round 5 and better. The amount of players that they need to watch is insane. I know that Bill and Randall were watching 40 wide receivers and 40 corners, and they podcasted about every single one of them. And then Newton Owen, I think they did probably about 20 interior. It was probably more than 20. 30 interior.
I have the numbers for you, Jim, because I have them on my board here, and this isn't counting the guys who went back to school. So we lost, I think, like 5 or 6 of the interior offensive linemen we talked about. So that was about 25, 26 interior offensive linemen, and we got up to like 22 defensive tackles, depending on who went back to school and stuff like that. So it was a little in the mid 20s there for each of those.
Yeah. So I am so humbled with just everybody that's put just a little bit or a lot of effort into the draft, Professor. All you guys in the chat, I'm sure I left out some of the names of some of the podcasters. And that's just me being on camera right now and my brain not working as fast as it normally does. So we have 2 picks left. And I don't think the 49ers GM is here anymore.
No.
Who were the picks they've made previously?
So the 49ers in round 1, Benjamin Morrison was round 2. Kelvin Banks, Benjamin Morrison, TJ Sanders.
Okay, can I take the floor here just to try to to bring one of my guys out here that I think is going to be kind of a riser that I'm excited to get out there. I'm not even sure if he's in your simulator yet or not, Jim. He was kind of a late commitment to the draft process. So if you want to go over to tight ends real quick, George Kittle is getting a little older along the tooth. He was one of the only players that stayed healthy for that skill position group for the 49ers there. And I'm glad to see that he is on the board here. And there he is, Oronde Gadsden from Syracuse. Big guy, 6'5", moves like a wide receiver, but has some developing to go when it comes to being that kind of straight up inline blocker tight end. But with having George Kittle, who is still one of, if not the best inline blocking tight ends in the NFL and has been for his entire career, you have a guy who can come in and be kind of this weapon for the 49ers that can complement what Kittle does and what he may lose as he gets older. And if you have a glut of injuries like he did this year with your wide receiver weapons, and you have slow to coming back from injury, I could definitely see them weaponizing a 2 tight end set, especially if they have someone as dynamic as Gadsden coming in. And this is even another tight end spot here that I was thinking about going with the guy for the Rams. But Bill, what do you think the Rams are gonna look to do here after taking Jackson Dart and Jabbar Muhammad previously in this draft?
I was going to say, with Jackson Dart and Jabbar Muhammad, the Rams are going to continue a run on tight end, right? They need to get a security blanket for Jackson Dart if they're looking here. You'd probably want to look at offensive tackle, but the value is just not there. I'm going to go with a guy who is my tight end number 3 on my big board as we speak. It's Gunnar Helm, the tight end out of Texas. He is just a pure pass catching tight end. Does need some work on his blocking, of course, but this is a guy, when you're looking at him, think like a Jake Ferguson type of guy, the way Jake Ferguson works for Dallas, that same skill set. He would be a great fit for Stafford if he comes back. If not, if Dart has to start year 1, it gives him a security blanket, and I think it's just an excellent pick. But Rondé Gadsden, you hit on it. This is a guy, big body guy, 6'5", 235. And I think if he ended up in San Francisco, they might use him as like a big wide receiver, like a power slot type of guy as well, and not just an inline type of guy. It reminds me a lot of Jared Cook, in the same thing that Jared Cook would do. You'd line him up in line as a blocker. You could line him up out of the backfield as a fullback. You could line him up as a power slot. This tight end class, folks, is pretty deep. It goes pretty deep into day 3, and there's different flavors. There's pass catchers. There's inline blockers like Jackson Hawes out of Georgia Tech. There's guys who do it both. You know, there's guys like Mitchell Evans. There's Jalen Conyers out of Texas Tech, 6'7", 260 pounds, and runs a 4.7 40. You know, just a freak athlete. So if your team needs a tight end, this is the year to get it. But with that, we've made it to the end of round 3, folks. And like Jim had said, if you're still here with us, we appreciate it. It's a Friday night. You could be out at the bar having a few drinks with the buddies, talking about the conference championship, but you're a fanatic like us and you love the draft and you decided to come to class tonight. We appreciate you. We're not going to take attendance, but there will be a quiz afterwards, folks. Kidding. There's no quiz. But make sure that if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you like the video. Make sure you subscribe to the Draft Professor YouTube channel. Turn on that notification bell and get notified whenever we have NFL draft content. Make sure you follow me over on X at Sparks Scouting, as well as check out twsn.net for all sorts of sports and NFL draft content. Make sure you follow Owen on X as well at Weekly Huddle. Make sure you check out his YouTube channel as well. Make sure you follow our lovely moderator, Jim, NFL Draft Fanatic. No, I in Fanatic. But most of all, make your way over to thedraftprofessor.com. You can make mock drafts like this too. And if you've got 32 friends, more the merrier.
Yeah.
Everybody can join in.
So there is a version of this simulator that will let 32 people log in each time. It has not been released to the general public. That is also a tease. So couple things. So any draft professor, if you are still listening and you want to come in and we can talk about each team's haul. Like, Owen, I asked you just to do the draft. If there's a couple of teams' hauls, maybe, Owen, that you want to talk about, but there's probably still some discussion where if we want to talk about, for example, the 3 guys at Green Bay, like, do you think that's the right value or something like that? We can go through each team's haul. So if you are a draft professor and you want that link, I'm about to drop it into our group chat. So,
and I'm sure these will make their way to the NFL Draft Fanatic, no I in Fanatic Twitter, where they're going to be posted out to get kind of the idea of the public here who couldn't make it to the stream tonight. And I'm sure we could have some good discourse in the comments there. Am I right, Jim?
Yep. Yes. You will see all of this on Twitter shortly. So, shortly depends on, I still have to pack for the Senior Bowl. So I am leaving for the Senior Bowl first thing tomorrow morning, and I am not packed yet. But
whoa. Jim, you better get to pack. You better get to packing if you're going to post all these. But that's the other thing, folks. The Draft Professor will be down in mobile at the Senior Bowl. So you probably think, this is just a YouTube channel. No, we're going to be boots on the ground. There's going to be, I believe, 5 or 6 draft professors in Mobile next week. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jim. I think that's what we were up to at that point. But they're going to be boots on the ground.
Devin Jackson, there's Anthony. Okay, so Devin Jackson will, I will, Josh will. Clint will. Dom will.
Yeah, so we're 6, 7. So we're up there.
Yeah, and then I know that like you and Brian had invites that were accepted, but you're not going.
Yeah,
right.
We both got credentialed, but we're unable to make it. But I will be at the NFL Scouting Combine in February. It's 30 minutes to my front door. So make sure if you're at Scouting Combine, come say hi to me. Make sure if you're down in Mobile at the Senior Bowl, come up and say hi to the draft professors. They don't bite. I promise. None of us do. If we do, we won't tell you until afterwards. But make sure you say hi to us. And then, of course, Mr. Anthony joining us this evening. Anthony has been the guy behind the scenes. He's been that ESPN producer that's running around with his headset on, screaming, "Why haven't we gone to commercial break 4 times?" Because he's trying to keep up with all the tweets. But Anthony, man, you killed it tonight. How are your fingers feeling after firing off all them tweets?
Oh, I feel great. Yeah, apparently my calling in life is to be a social media coordinator. It was a fun time. I enjoyed watching the picks. Enjoyed interacting with you guys and all the people that were in the chat. I think the Twitter, the X, whatever. I think the live video of that got up to like 800 something views at this point. So that's pretty cool. Yeah, this is, oh my God, is Brian Schottenheimer really Cowboys coach? Wow.
Well, Owen, is that real?
What a way to end this.
That came from Adam Schefter on Twitter.
Okay.
I believe him.
Well, that's a credible source. So,
Yep. Yeah, I'm looking at it now.
oh, okay. So I have to unshare that. Sorry about that, everybody. I switched monitors. So yeah, so the people that were complaining about like where my eyes were, I had the mock draft simulator on the big monitor. So that most of the time my eyes were here, but that means that if I'm actually speaking, I was not looking at the monitor. So I'm well aware of that, but I thought it was more important to display the whole simulator. So Owen, I don't know how much longer you want to stick around.
I'll probably be heading off shortly. I am currently running on what's the math that hour 18 of being up and moving and working. So I'll probably be logging off shortly. I do want to thank you for pulling this up. This is what I was actually going to request for real quick. I know that the Isaiah Bond pick was probably the most controversial I made tonight. But I do think that if the Bills came out of the first 3 rounds with this haul, I don't really see a world where many people are disappointed with that. Maybe when I get done watching the rest of this wide receiver group and as well the edge rushers, I may tweak some of this, but I think I hit pretty well. How are you feeling about this haul, Jim?
It really bothers me that we didn't get one of the better defensive linemen, but with the way the board fell, you did what needed to be done, right? We couldn't reach for a defensive lineman or interior defensive lineman at pick 30. So it made sense. I would be curious about Capehart versus Darius Alexander.
Yeah, I was looking at that specifically, and I like Capehart's upside as it comes to interior pass rush. Like we've had these guys who, even if they're not like super great pass rushers and nose tackle, they know how to use their hands to condense a pocket. They have that natural strength as well as their athleticism to put these more slow-footed interior offensive linemen on their back foot. And as long as he's able to do that and free up space for some of the other D linemen on the Bills, I think Capehart personally, I like to do that the best, and I like his upside with that. I love Alfred Collins to project to that most, but someone sniped him at 18 when I was expecting him to be in those late 20s range. So that was the big disappointment for me when I first got on here. I was like, damn. And then Derek Harmon went a couple picks beforehand, so I really had to scramble. And with Nick Scorton just kind of being that kind of Billsy built edge rusher that a lot of people have higher on their boards than where he actually went to, I felt that grabbing him super late as opposed to where his value is in some other people's eyes, as well as with his play style and his body build. I feel like that's a pretty Billsy pick there that I think I wouldn't really complain about if I was to see them grab that, even if we did miss out on the top tier D tackles.
Okay. So, and if the audience didn't hear Owen's introduction at the beginning, Owen doesn't say it very much, but he is a scout for the University of Buffalo. And then in his spare time, he podcasts with us when he just builds an NFL big board. So like Owen, I'm always impressed from the first podcast where I met you, just always impressed with how you communicate about the players. So you are tremendously appreciated by me. Thank you very much for being the host, right? You were here pretty much for the whole thing. So that's,
yeah, of course I had to be my fashionably late, yeah. Had to keep people waiting.
You didn't podcast and drive, so that's okay.
Right.
That's okay.
That was one. If you learned anything from this mock draft, is you don't mock draft and drive, people.
No,
absolutely
no
not.
mocking and driving.
Yep. And also want to give a shout out to your cat for not like knocking over your computer or anything like that.
They are obsessed specifically because I'm up in my upstairs room, which is also the cat room. Whenever I sit down to record anything or I'm on live with anything, they think it's the most hilarious thing ever to immediately come up and try to speak into the microphone as well as I am. So they'll come and sit right next to me on my desk and like meow directly into the mic. So I was kind of fighting them off the entire time to make sure we didn't get any.
They're just giving a hot take about your big board. That's all it is. They want the big board to be known.
Cool.
Yeah, okay. They said you have Walter Nolan that high in your first round, and he was there at the 20s. What are you doing?
Yep. So let's go through a few more teams. So Anthony, let's find the Jets. You want to talk about yours for a minute, Anthony?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think at least the first two picks are pretty solid picks. Mason Graham is, I mean, he's the third best player on my board. Perfect fit for the Jets, I think, for what they're looking for. They're going to want somebody next to Quinnen. They're going to want just more physical in the trenches in general with now Aaron. But yeah, I think Mason Graham is just such a great pick for them at this point. Wyatt Milam, kind of the
Yeah, so Anthony, your audio
vibe just on the opposite side of the ball. Get more. Sorry,
your audio's cutting in and out.
Is it? Hold on, wait. Let me. Might be my Wi-Fi might be acting up a bit.
No worries.
How's it now? Is it
That's
better? Okay. I don't know what you heard, but basically Mason Graham, great fit, really fits the physical trenches that Aaron Glenn's going to want to build up. Wyatt Milam's kind of the same deal, just on the opposite side of the ball. Him and Olu Fashanu is going to be a great left side pair, I think, for the future. Gives the offensive line just more flexibility going forward. Ricky White is more of a personal pick. I've been a fan of his since the summer. I think he's just such an explosive weapon. Really put the UNLV team on his back, not just as a receiver, but making plays on special teams. I think he fits that sort of gritty, do it all style that Aaron Glenn, I think, is really going to like. I think he can give sort of similar to what Jamison Williams gives Detroit. I don't think he's quite as dynamic a playmaker and as, frankly, just as fast as Jamison Williams is. But that sort of, mismatch, get him in space, allow him to create. I think he can do that very well. And if he blocks a punt or two while he's on the Jets too, I'm all for it. I think he had like 5 or 6 punt blocks for the Rebels this year, which was pretty sick. But yeah, just all about, I think, reinventing the culture and the mindset. I think all 3 of these players are tough, gritty, no-nonsense players that are going to put in the work, and Aaron Glenn's going to really appreciate that.
Okay. And Bill, you can do Cleveland. So you want to talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, so I think if Cleveland gets this board right here, I think it's a home run A+. You take a generational edge prospect and Abdul Carter, who's just a freak athlete. It's Micah Parsons 2.0, and then you get your quarterback of the future in Jalen Milroe, who has worked with our offensive coordinator before in Tommy Rees. Definitely, his best season at Alabama was under Tommy Rees, and Caleb Johnson is just a perfect fit for what this team wants to run in wide zone schemes. It can either replace Nick Chubb or work in concert with him. And then Mason Taylor, again, another great tight end, perfect in 2 tight end sets, very athletic, but can also be a really good blocker as well. I think if you're Cleveland, this is probably an A+ draft. And I'm not saying that just because I'm a Browns fan, but I think this hits every single need that's out there. I think all the teams we've covered so far, Buffalo, Anthony's New York Jets, the Cleveland Browns, Tennessee Titans getting Jack Sawyer and Shedeur Sanders. That's a great fit. The Giants, Cam Ward, Donovan Jackson as a future left tackle to protect Cam Ward, and then Cam Scatteraboo as a weapon to pair with Tyrone Tracy. And Anthony, you saw him from tweeting them out several times. Was there any team that really had a quote unquote bad draft or a surprising draft that you saw?
I don't remember any what I would call bad drafts. I was actually just thinking about who did the Cowboys? I know they had Burden, and then it was Hampton. I can't remember who the third pick was. Oh, Jalot. Because now I'm thinking like Brian Schottenheimer is, I guess, now officially their head coach. So I think Omarion Hampton is going to be pretty important for the Cowboys in this if this happens. I mean, obviously, running back in general will be important, but Omarion Hampton, I think, really fits the kind of running back that Brian Schottenheimer is going to like. I think back to the Sean Green Jets, if you guys remember that. Big power back that can also create in space a bit. It sort of reminds me of that. And then you have a guy like Luther Burden who's able to stretch the field a little bit more and win with speed and win after the catch. So if you gave two playmakers like that to Brian Schottenheimer and Dak Prescott at quarterback, I think this Dallas offense would be much improved from what we saw this past season. There'd still be questions, I think, on the offensive line would be my other nitpick with this, besides the fact I'm just not as high on Burden as others. But in terms of, again, what you're doing to the offense and how you're sort of reimagining it, I like what Dallas is doing here.
So want to give a shout out to the Jaguars because Michael is a draft professor, and I forgot you were in the chat, and I didn't give you a shout out before, so that's on me. I want to talk about a couple things. So first of all, from a draft, like this one surprised me, but my opinion is that it's a good draft because getting Will Johnson and Xavier Watts, while there may have been bigger needs than safety, the player being on the board by that pick, that's a good pick, and then filling in a couple of other needs. So a couple of things I'll point out about the grading. So why is Xavier Watts a D? It's based upon where Xavier Watts was on the board. So nobody from Jacksonville had picked Xavier Watts yet. So he didn't move up their board. Okay. The more you pick somebody, if you notice most of the grades there, we're not seeing a lot of A pluses. Let me try to find a team that has they didn't have an A plus. I'm going to see if I can find a team that has an A plus. So, Buffalo did. Bills are at the end.
I say
it's
if it
not
was the Cardinals,
alphabetical,
it was
it's by
probably
draft order. Oh, and Scourton wasn't even the top player on the board, so I thought that was going to be an A plus. I'm looking for any team where we selected the top player on the board. So, like in this case, the Bengals got a straight A draft because all those players were in the top 8 at the time that they were picked. If Kenneth Grant was number 1 on the board, he would have been A plus. This A means he was top 8, but that means he was 2 through 8. He was not number 1. So that's what the grading is. So if you don't like the grading, when I designed the simulator, I knew I had to have grading, but that was not something I wanted to spend a lot of time on. So it was just based upon where they were on the draft board. And my mother will tell you that my grades never mattered growing up. So I really don't care what a grade is on a draft class, but there are grades on the simulator because every other simulator has them. And I wanted to put something in quickly. So like, for example, if you notice this A plus by Mason Taylor for the Browns, it was because he was the highest player on the board at the time that Bill picked him. The other guys were just top 8 players, or B is player 9 through 16. So that's how the grades get there. I always hear feedback on the grades, so I wanted to point that out. Okay, so there's a couple comments in the chat. Panthers. Okay, so somebody said the Panthers had an A plus. Let's go take a look at the Panthers. Yeah, because Jalen Walker. So I know that Cole likes Jalen Walker, right? And then Io Manor dropping to round 2. So I've seen Io Manor get mock drafted in round 1, and then I've seen other people give scouting reports on him that aren't as high. So there's a range. And one thing that I would like to point out, as we were going through the podcast and people were pointing out things like, that's not realistic, that player won't drop. Humans are the ones making the decisions about who gets mock drafted where. So if somebody doesn't value the player, then he's just going to keep falling, right? And well, we're doing this in January. So if you're watching this in rewind, this is being done the weekend before the Bills play the Chiefs and the weekend before the Commanders play the Eagles, kind of thing. So we're still getting our board set. Like Owen, with all of what he was doing with the podcasting, his wide receiver board isn't done yet. Like he's already communicated that to like me and Newt. So kind of thing. So the podcasters are building their boards while they're podcasting. Right. So we have a lot of time, and we're going to be doing this nearly every weekend. But we've also been going for 3 straight hours. And I know Bill's about to turn into a pumpkin.
I've been here since the start. I started with Anthony on backstage, and then came on when there was some traffic for Owen, and a little bit of that. And folks, if we haven't said it enough, we appreciate you spending your Friday nights with us. This has been a fun exercise here at what we call the Draft Roundtable. Every Friday night, draft professors, we all get together and we do mock drafts like this, or we just talk NFL draft topics. So make sure, if you aren't already, make sure you're following the Draft Professor YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel. Turn on that notification bell so you get notified when we do these types of mock drafts on Friday night. Make sure you like the video. Make sure you follow Mr. Jim at NFL Draft Fanatic, no I in Fanatic over on X. Make sure you follow Anthony Russo at Anthony_Russo97 over on X, if I am correct on that, Anthony.
Yes, sir.
Make sure you follow me over on X at Sparks Scouting, as well as go check out twsn.net for all things NFL Draft. We appreciate you spending your time with us, but make sure 2 things before you walk out of here tonight, out of the Draft Professor classroom. Number 1, don't mock draft and drive. We don't condone that in any way, shape, or form, folks. And then also make sure you make your way over to the draftprofessor.com and check out Jim's simulator, because I don't care what PFF says or PFN or Mock Draft Database says. Jim's got the best mock draft simulator out there in the world right now. And we appreciate him letting us, hang out with him for 3 straight hours. But Jim, before you let the people go, I know you're running through over there with the Jag simulator. I'll turn it back over to you, sir.
Yeah. So if you notice, Mike, I just did a quick 2-round Jacksonville mock to take the same 2 players that you took. Okay. So observe how Will Johnson now moved to an A+. He's the highest player in the Jacksonville board now. He was not, like, if we look over here and we look at Jacksonville, he was an A. See how he's an A+ now? It's because when you selected him, he moved higher than whoever the simulator had ranked ahead of him. Okay? So that's how that happened. Watts is still a D because he's only moving up the Jacksonville board a little bit when we take him in round 2. So it would probably, somebody's going to have to take Watts probably 5 to 10 more times just to get that grade to turn into an A, kind of thing. So the more you pick them, the more they move up. So that's the way the grading works. And like I said, the grading isn't perfect. There's plenty of people on Twitter that rake me over the coals when all these players get Ds. Well, if people do more mock drafts, your grades will improve. I guarantee it. The more mocks you do, the better your grades get. And that's the fanatic that we're looking for. So, but on behalf of all 30 podcasters at the Draft Professor, very humbled with how well this turnout was. This was incredible. For all of the work that every single person participating in the chat put in to build your board, for the work that Anthony and Bill were doing behind the scenes, this is not a one-person operation. I want to emphasize that. There are so many people that just did enough little things and a few big things to make this happen. Thank you very much for watching, and we will see you on a podcast again tomorrow. Thanks, everybody.
Peace.
Thank you for watching this episode of Mrs. R Relevant, the Daily Draft Podcast, brought to you by the Draft Professor. Please follow the Draft Professor on X at NFL Draft Fanatic. No, I am Fanatic. Please follow the Draft Professor channel on YouTube at NFL Draft Fanatic. No, I am Fanatic. We look forward to seeing you on our podcast tomorrow.